Okay, so this is Elsa McDowell. I'm in town in Tulsa from Philadelphia. So the talk today, sort of a bit of a repeat from those of you who are here on Wednesday, but I rejuggled. I initially had 130 slides when I was conceptualizing this, and then I narrowed it down to 100, and then I think after Wednesday I got it back down to 80. So if we're not booted out and y'all are still interested, I'll try to sort of click through and maybe we'll get through some more content because I know some of y'all were here on Wednesday and this will be a repeat for some folks. But so who am I? I'm a mom. Mostly I'm a mom. I have a great kid. We've been through the Philadelphia Public School District for 13 years and we're at Crucible of Ed Reform. We've had 8 road superintendents. I really got involved. I mean, I used to just run little fundraising events for my kids' school and volunteer and do my best to help support an urban school district. And our experience is that, the schools are set up so that, it's austerity, it's competition, it's like every family's trying to make the path for their kid. And for the most part, it worked out for us. We got lucky, we did the things. I had a child who could work within the system and benefited from that. And the more I understood trying to sort of leverage our position in different schools of privilege to try to talk about larger issues that were affecting schools which are incredibly underfunded and where people are being miseducated, largely. So I came into this through standardized testing. One of the things was they closed down 23 schools in 2015 and laid off 3,000 teachers. And a lot of the teachers came back in, but when all of this happened in the spring, that summer they instituted a new school report card program. And so they had a sneaky meeting in late August when the schools are, there's no daycare, and so if you can take a vacation, you take it those 2 weeks in August. So I rallied a bunch of folks and we all went to the meeting, and I think I had little placards calling them out, and we all stood behind it, And the Dell Foundation had funded the school report card. And at the time I'm like, oh, y'all just want to sell their computers and the software program. I know what this is about. This is like a raid on our funds to turn our education into software. And it wasn't until much later, after actually I saw, I think it's Citizen4 and Snowden, that I understood, when Snowden is throwing down his credentials on the bed, talking about how he knows all the information he knows. He's like, and here's my Dell credential. And then I was like, oh, actually Dell is one of the largest contractors to the NSA, right? So it's not just about the tech and the money and the software and the equipment, it's about the data, and it's about these larger systems, structural systems of profiling and risk profiling. So I'm like, you know what? And then it was supposed to be a series of 6 meetings, and we went to the first one and we shook them up, and then people went to the next meeting, which I couldn't attend, and there was a note on the door, and it just said, oh, we're not, this meeting is canceled, we're gonna have focus groups. This is not right. Something is terribly fishy. I mean, it's like y'all know at TPS when you come to these meetings and you realize it's a scam, and the public is trying to exert their will and their voice, and it's being shut down. So I said, they are using our test scores to close down our schools. So they're underfunding our schools, and then they're saying they have bad academic performance, and they're using that to close the schools. So why don't we start to withhold that data? And so I saw there was a film about opt-out, the national opt-out movement, and I'd never done this before, but they were meeting in Denver, and I got on a plane, and not knowing anybody, and flew to Denver to see, and it was kind of proportionally, so we're, this size group, right? But maybe 50 people, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just us, and we got to do the thing. But you have to do the thing with the people who show up. So we're like, okay. So I did that really hard for 2 or 3 years until the point that in Pennsylvania we had a legal opt-out right. And I think it might have come through the Amish on religious grounds. And it's in the state book that parents can opt out, but they hide it and they don't tell people. And I went and I said, at the school board meeting, you guys need to make copies of that page. You need to give it to the principals because they don't have paper. And you need to translate it in all the right languages so that every parent knows that they don't have to take this test if they don't want to. And they said, okay. And they don't do that. Even if they're supposed to, they always fight you back. And I was like, what's going on here? What is happening? I'm like, is this about charter schools? What is the subtext that you would go along with me opting out of this test? Well, so this was the summer in the lead up to the Every Student Succeeds Act passing, okay? And what was embedded in the act was pay for success finance and ed tech, lots of provisions for and data tracking. And so what we'll talk about later is that ultimately what these markets, human capital markets, need is they need lots of real-time data all the time. And so an end-of-the-year test on 2 subjects was not nearly enough data, okay? So they were going to move to an all-the-time testing model where it was even shifting from benchmark testing, which had already been creeping in, to essentially data mining kids through educational technology systems constantly. And so they didn't really mind if we opted out of the end-of-the-year test, because ultimately the game was going to be, unless you're opting out of ed tech, which means you're opting out of most of your educational delivery system, like you're trapped, right? And people who, and many people across the country have left public education systems over many reasons, like having needs not being met, but also they're just like, well, if you opt out of the Chromebooks, we can't teach your child. And then they leave because they're the one parent, or they're the only one in their school or in their district, and that has happened. So I fought ed tech for a couple years after that, and then I realized this is about data. It's not just about data in schools, it's actually about data in all of our public systems, serving people, in our healthcare systems, in our mental health systems, in our housing systems. It really, and I think we're more and more understanding the role and the power of big data in people's lives in the fourth industrial revolution. So it just kept getting bigger. Like my scope, my view kept getting bigger. But so I started following money, and this is mostly what I do. So I have the fortunate position I work half time in a beautiful place with amazing people that keep me grounded, and then the other half of the time I follow data and I follow money. And none of the stuff that I found is that I have a special credential. I mean, I have my husband works at a university, and like I could access databases if I wanted to. I don't need to. This stuff is all out there. They just figure that people who are going to be affected don't have the time to find them. And I will highly recommend Mark Ruffalo's new movie Dark Waters, because it's about a man who's a lawyer who takes on DuPont and the Teflon poisoning of communities. But essentially what they did in this film is he was doing discovery and DuPont was holding out, and then finally they're like, okay, we'll give you your discovery. And they brought in like 2 semi-trailers full of boxes, and they filled the whole room, like this room full of boxes, and said, like, it's in there, I dare you to find it, And he sat down with Post-it notes or whatever, and he just started. And that's kind of, I feel like I'm in this digital storage room where the answer is in there. We just have to have people who have the wherewithal and the privilege to dig in and find it and make sense of what's happening. So I look at LinkedIn. This is an example of a community ambassador for Palantir. So Palantir is Peter Thiel's company. They do predictive policing. They have Customs and Border Security and ICE. But they're all about tracking people, but also being your ambassador to the community, okay? So just depends on like how you frame it. So that's LinkedIn profiles, 990 tax forms. This is for big picture learning, which goes back and it's framed as a progressive project-based learning model, comes out of Rhode Island. I think in Tulsa, there's a program called the MET that started junior high school and high school that is affiliated with Big Picture. But here in their 990, it pretty much says that their goal is to have a telecommunications to create their model. So they're framing actually their model as like a hands-on project-based learning. But if you look in their 990, this is an old one, but it says it's always been based in technology, a technology system. I go to a lot of meetings. So my background is that my situation is because our city of Philadelphia has such deep poverty and is in the center, much like Tulsa is, of all of these activities. There are meetings where this is happening in real life to people I know, and then I can zoom out and have the eagle eye view. So I sort of have this macro view and this micro view and like knitting them together at the same time. So I go to meetings and then I just show up places, mostly with like small groups of people, and just sort of disrupt this narrative. Because a lot of, I think, what our challenge is, and I know like we've had some talks, people would like a strategic plan, they would like they know their next steps. And I feel like my role is to give as much intelligence as I can so people understand the larger structure, because understanding this global system, I feel that agency and self-determination is key. And people need to have a broad base of information to decide what they want to do. And and to support communities, especially communities that have been harmed by these systems for generations. but it should be their choice, but they need the information. And what we need to do is better package the information so that they can access it in a way that is hopefully not too overwhelming and actionable, right? And so in the meantime, I'm talking to people and I'm just disrupting stuff where I can. And Julianne and I, we showed up. There was Impact Tulsa, which is the Strive Together Human Capital group here in Tulsa. They were rolling out their Impact program, and maybe I'll circulate it around. Oh, here it is. If anybody wants to take a look. These are all their impact metrics on their pathway. And we just showed up, and I the banner that's out there, we just laid it down and we said, there's more to talk about here than what you're going to talk about in that room. There's other things that people need to know. And they need to know this, and we're resisting. We don't agree with some of these concepts and the people that you're affiliated with. And we shared information, but clearly those people are not there, but maybe they'll listen and watch later. But really disrupting narrative is really important because that's the way we're going to move forward. So I make maps. I make these giant maps. This is an Educare map. I have a colleague who's in San Jose State. She's a professor. She gets great information in coffee shops. So I would highly suggest professors, if there's go to the tech area of your town and grade your papers and see what you hear, because Roxana, and she's also in a lot of meetings and information. So people come on my radar and I map this out. So Educare actually is originally a concept of this pre-K program out of Chicago, but there's multiple sites, including Tulsa, and essentially, and it's a little out of focus, and I'll send you the slide so you can actually go and look at this map, but these are all technology interests that are contributing money to Educare for pre-K. So these are toddlers, okay? Over here is the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services running Head Start, saying we need toddlers to be on technology, okay? Because we need data, not because it's good for toddlers. We have New America, which is mostly Google, funding films called No Small Matter to say early childhood counts and we need to build children's brains, but we're going to do it through learning engineering with technology. We're seeding these markets because Educare is really an incubator program. They need a proof of concept, and right now we're in this moment where they're developing all the proofs of concept. So the Kaiser Foundation was putting money into Educare Silicon Valley, and they're part of a larger collective called Blue Meridian Partners, which is a capital aggregation fund that is chaired by Stanley Druckenmiller. Now, Stanley Druckenmiller is here. He was George Soros's, one of his hedge fund managers. And back in the 90s, they shorted the British pound for $1 billion in one day. So we have to understand that this is about gambling with numbers. It's legalized gambling, really. And these folks who have this much power must be able to disassociate the impact of their game on the lives of children who are being fed into devices so this game can happen, okay? So Stanley Druckenmiller he worked with Jeffrey Canada in the Harlem Children's Zone. That was an incubator for a lot of this. For the past 30 years, these folks have a really big time horizon to develop equations that are going to run these pay-for-success models. And this is where we were talking about Chicago. The models run on equations, and Jim Heckman from University of Chicago has set the biggest return on investment model on child data. So these are these giant maps that I do, and then I blog and I try to tell stories about them.
So are you saying Canada's a bad person?
I don't know. So I would say, well, we'll get there. I would say if you believe that you could package a child's future as a commodity and put it into an equation to benefit an investor, I mean, if you think that that's fine, then you might think he's a good guy. If you think that that's not fine, I would say that that's ultimately what he's doing. So, and up front, in the immediate moment, there are direct needs being met, but the precedent that's being created as the world around us becomes more complex with ubiquitous surveillance and data, and where the power is more and more concentrated, it becomes very dangerous. So something that 30 years ago may have started out from a certain place is rapidly evolving into something that's very treacherous, I believe. So I think it's important to understand context. So my background academically, weirdly, so my undergraduate was art history. And then I briefly went to graduate school for that, and I saw all the people were super miserable, and I'm like, why do I want to spend all my time doing that? And whatever. So I ended up moving up to Philadelphia where my husband was, and I got a master's in historic preservation, learning all the wrong stuff. But there it is, got better later. But it was looking at cultural landscapes. And so these maps are sort of my landscape that I'm mapping. But I think understanding education being situated within these larger systems is very vital. And I think a lot of folks who are in education have a very narrow focus, and people may have a very narrow focus on any one of these things, but we have to understand them in their totality. So our city is a city of deep poverty. So we have trauma, we have debt, we have people driving Instacart with 3 different jobs that can't work. We have intense structural racism, increasingly militarized policing and state violence against their own people, increasing smart policing and surveillance systems being installed. Those systems are all increasingly being attached to automated systems of machine learning and artificial intelligence, which are, again, not really accessible to the public. And if you think about your big data government and it's being framed as transparent and accountable and open data, and it's how they frame it, that how wonderful, look, open data, like we'll all share. But who's using the open data? Well, in our city, one of the big open data projects, the NSF funded the Philadelphia Police Department to develop predictive policing with a guy who later leveraged it as a corporate product with our free data and sold it back to us and East St. Louis and Chicago. And it's called Hunch Lab, it's called Acevea. So that's the ways in which the public assets become hijacked, because who's going to have the wherewithal to benefit from this open data? Is it like the PTA, your parents group, like to do this open? No, it's people who know data analytics and who can pay those people, and they're benefiting and they're creating oppressive systems and making money off of it with our tax dollars. So this is all, and all of this sort of drives on austerity, but you have to deconstruct and you have to know that this is what's happening. And it's not such a big deal in Philadelphia, but environmental crises will be increasingly important going forward in terms of instability. So this is another thing that I've really evolved a lot on. So I call myself sort of a recovering liberal, because I've sort of fallen off the left. I mean, I think at this point I'm sort of, communitarian, like don't hurt other people, recognize our racist past, and like let's unite and go forward with some push towards agency and reciprocal relationships, right? Because what we're up against is these folks. Like this is Boston Dynamics. So we're talking Fourth Industrial Revolution. We're talking robots. At this point, there's still remote control, so like there's still a person involved. But it is this really twisted system, and I believe, and this is my positioning, is that it is built on, our history of racial capitalism. It is built on this sense of that this doctrine of discovery, go out, if you're not Christian, we can take your stuff, we can take your family, we can take your land. Some people count more than others, and if we can accrue our wealth and power by dominating other people, and we've never really grappled with that, and we need to. And that as we look towards the resistance that's going to be needed, I believe that people who have always been resisting these systems that now manifest as robots it's coming out of the Black radical tradition and indigenous sovereignty movements, because they're the people who for generations have been figuring out ways of subverting, finding other ways of resisting either overtly or covertly these systems. And so thinking about we need to respect that legacy and hopefully share information, find ways of sharing information that we can collectively act. But it has to be, my position is understood within this continuum of history. So the other thing about automation, I would highly recommend Surveillance Valley as a read. So Yasha Levine, there are a lot of books about technology now, and a lot of people are like, oh, like it's just gotten messed up. Like we can get it back. It was really good, and now it's gone bad. Well, what Yasha Levine's point is that it's always been a tool of the military, and really it's always actually been a tool to subvert leftist organizing. And looking at the systems of cybernetics at MIT and Harvard, and actually like very major protest movements that came out of the Vietnam War against surveillance technologies that have been suppressed, and this history has been very much suppressed. He speaks a lot about Norbert Wiener, who was sort of a human computer of his day and created the field of sort of AI and cybernetics, and then realized as it went along, like kind of like, the Manhattan Project, like, well, what have we done? What have we done? And what are the consequences of automation of labor, right? That it's an equivalency of slave labor. And so now we're moving forward, I think some folks think of a digital utopia, that the robots will do all the work and we'll sit and write novels. But the reality is that those systems of power have gotten more and more twisted, right? It's not, the people who have power are not interested in sharing with the masses. So we are looking at some pretty intense times coming up, but it hasn't all happened. Like, that's been since the 50s. So I'm just saying, like, don't get all demoralized. It's a long range, and we can resist it in many ways. And they may not figure out how to do all the pieces, but we should be aware. So, Fourth Industrial Revolution. If you guys are not familiar with that, it is artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, which is sensors in different places. Really, in a simple way, our phone is an Internet of Things device. Barcodes, the thing like in your t-shirt, the tag that tracks, these are all very simple Internet of Things, but they've actually developed sensors at this point that can be mixed into paint, that can be put into pavements. Like Colorado's looking at Internet of Things highways, so that if you can imagine the amount of information overload we have today, times 100, right? This amount of data going through. And they're building this infrastructure now to handle this capacity, and that is what 5G is about. The idea of machine learning and using this data to predict and control and to actually build systems that think beyond people. And I mean, you hear about some of these things like with Facebook and getting out beyond and them unplugging the machine, right? But that is what all of these changes that I'm going to show about education, people are like, well, that's the strangest thing I've ever seen. I can't imagine why in the world we would ever do something like that. It's in response to this. It's not, I think people who dismiss it as that doesn't make any sense don't quite understand what this is that is coming. And so that, again, I mentioned the military signals intelligence. Again, this has been developing for a long time. There's a really good book, another book called The Friendly Orange Glow, and it's about the Plato system at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign and the ways in which they were developing systems that connect to social media today. So this is a long lead, but really the jump happened with cloud-based computing. So there was a big jump when you didn't have to have your big computer sitting on your desk, and the next big jump will be Internet of Things and wearable technology and persistent surveillance. So the ed tech business that started, it came directly out of the military, and Clinton signed Executive Order 13111 in 1999. This built off of like 4 or 5 years earlier working with the National Guard and the Defense Department. Essentially, and it made sense at the time, they were, we've got these Navy submarines, nuclear submarines out in the South Pacific, and they've got to update their software, and they have to learn they're not coming back to Norfolk or San Diego or Seattle before, we'll just distance learning them, and they'll get their update on their software where they are. And so they did that for a while, and that makes sense, if you're into nuclear submarines. And then they said, but we should just use that for all federal employees, because this is really good stuff. And they're like, we should just use it for everybody all the time. And no one's thinking really, because this is a technocracy, what do we lose when we turn our whole education system into a training system that is online? It's not the same thing. Training and education are not the same thing. So this created the Advanced Distributed Learning System, which came out of the Defense Department, working in cooperation with the Department of Education. And there are 4 ADL collabs. So there's one in Alexandria, and that's the administrative lab. There's one at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is the quote-unquote academic lab, but they do a lot of gamification, video gaming in University of Wisconsin-Madison. There's one in Memphis, and that's, if you think about, I believe it's FedEx in Memphis, based in Memphis, the Workforce Development Lab. They're doing a lot at the University of Memphis with human-computer interfaces now. And then the other one is in Orlando, and that's the Defense Lab. But the Orlando lab actually has a lot to do with virtual reality simulations and that kind of technology. So it weirdly blends like the Disney version, like the entertainment world versions, with the military stuff that's going on. So it's a huge industry, the ed tech industry. Again, we know the computers, the software, the cloud computing, but also it'll be this human capital. So Arizona State University and Global Silicon Venture Capital, ASU is Michael Crow. He was the board chair of InQtel, which is the venture capital arm of the CIA. They've been hosting these conferences for at least 8 years, where they bring, and like all you have to do is look up ASU plus GSV, and you'll just look at all their videos. And I mean, that's the thing that's shocking, is that I don't think people who are in education, who are teachers, who are professors, unless that's your world, are looking at that. But it's very clear what their plan is to go to a fully online global free market model of education enterprise. But again, it's within a surveillance context. So if you don't know about Bluffdale, there's a lot going on in the Salt Lake City, Utah area. It's one of the ARPA nodes, and this data center in Bluffdale was set up to hold 100 years worth of data on every person in the country. And my sense is it will be one of those things that'll be like the FISA court. Like, they'll have all the data and they won't tap into it until they get, a filing on you, right? And then they can pull all the back data and build a case. But your data lives in Bluffdale, and people need to know that. And then the other piece of this, just in this learning ecosystem we'll talk about, is these badges, turning education into essentially a series of points, of compliance points, of demonstrating that you have these skills. But the badge system has been connected to ADL this whole time. Globalism. So I know a lot of folks who are more conservative are saying, like, it's the globalists and the UN. And it kind of is, only it's the globalists, we're the globalists. It's like big oil, big tech, big finance. A lot of them are US, not exclusively. But we have to understand this, and I'm coming at this from like a mom's perspective, as if we're understanding the cyber infrastructure that's being put in place as a military infrastructure, that it has to be pro people and planet, pro care and right relationships, and we have to have connections to people who are being oppressed across the world, because these systems are oppressing people across the world, and we need to learn from how people are being oppressed in other countries, because what is there can be in our backyard in a week. Once in the cloud world, things can move very quickly. So this is an example of a home visit program in Boa Vista, Brazil. It's tied to the Bolsa Familia program allotment, which is like a government payment for low-income families, which again sounds good, right? But that's the people to get in this program were all part of the Bolsa Familia program. So they would come in as part of this assessment of these families, set up blockchain identity systems for these families, and they would actually use tablet-based or phone-based video recorders to record the interactions of families in their homes to justify impact investing deals of investors in these products. So they were matching facial recognition and AI systems into digital identity, which I'll talk about, for global finance. So the thing is, this company that was doing the infrastructure, the man, he was from Hong Kong. He went to school in Hong Kong. He went to school at Columbia University. He went to school at London School of Economics. He paired his company, Shanzai City, and IO2 Foundation with IXO Foundation, which was a Swiss entity working in Cape Town, also on a similar program, but they didn't have the cameras. Okay, because China is very far advanced on facial recognition and AI. So those two global companies met in a room in Switzerland and had a little, gathering like we're having here. And they said, we should collaborate on this so we can continue to scale this program. So the mayor of this small town was in New York City, November 2018, for this global investment conference on pre-K. And in this conference from Ready Nation, no early childhood people were allowed to attend without the pre-authorization of 4 vetted business people. Okay? So when I'm talking about the world, like this one dynamic talks about China, Brazil, Cape Town, Switzerland, New York City. And people in my city have been briefed on the IXO pre-K digital identity app, right? So it may seem far away, like why do we care about this tiny town in Brazil? But it's the bellwether of what's coming, because in these cloud worlds, it's very replicable. And so this is from Global Education Futures Forum. It's a very upsetting document. It's essentially a foresight document where they are making a projection for education up to 2035. And this is just a small zoom in of it. But they have this timeline, and they talk about the crisis of industrial education follows a recession, and it necessitates cuts in education budgets, and new formats are in high demand, right? So you manufacture economic crises to change the delivery of educational models, that you have, big data for efficient mass scale recommendations for career tracks. And all of these things that you're seeing now with TU and with TPS around pathways and career tracks really tie back to these foresight documents. Health assessment education, assessments of psychophysical status to adjust individual education outcomes. Like that, it kind of got cut off there. But
so this is from...
This is the Global Education Futures Forum.
Okay, and so if we Google it, we get that stuff?
So it'll
Where
go
do we get
to,
this stuff?
you have to, it's interesting because they don't let you click into the specific pages.
Okay.
It just goes to the main page, but if you look at maps and posters, this is the maps and posters link.
Okay.
And this is one of the
What
downloads.
Global Education Futures Forum?
So the Global Education Futures Forum, that was, so when Julianne had her moment of like finding my blog and going, this is it.
Okay.
So I had my a number of years ago when I was doing opt-out, when my friend Emily, was a second grade teacher in Maine, and she was writing a blog trying to make sense of what was happening in Maine. Also, it came from Alaskan oil stuff in Alaska, interestingly enough. So, but she said, only click this link if you're going to go down the rabbit hole.
Okay.
I was like, oh my gosh. And this is like, okay, people are like, how do you figure this out? I'm like, well, I just looked at their map because they say what they're doing.
But what is the
So Global Education Futures Forum it's connected to Pavel Luksha. He is a transhumanist Russian. He's connected to Skolkovo Institute. Skolkovo is like the Silicon Valley of Russia, business school. And his background is actually, I think it may be in mining or geology. Vander Ark came from the Colorado School of Mines. So it's very interesting that these people who are doing this have extractive programs. His name is Tom Vander Ark. So he's the U.S. connection. He formerly worked for the Gates Foundation. He knows. Yeah, so Pavel Luksha created Global Education Futures Forum. And if you look on their site, they have advisors from Harvard.
Okay.
But they're also global. They're throughout Asia,
So they're like a
Latin
private
America.
organization that advises governments, or what? I'm trying to figure out what it is.
Well,
That's my
it's
question.
like this dark shadow, right?
Okay.
So they talk about foresight and sort of signals. They'll talk about, we're taking all these signals and we're projecting forward what's going to happen.
So they're sort of...
And then they frame it, but then these policies get run through to set up this infrastructure.
Okay.
So it's out of Stanford and Harvard. These are not kooky, but there are equivalencies in Korea, in Argentina, in other spaces. There's a huge component around, again, psychosocial, like mental health, management, and human-computer interfaces, and Internet of Things. You'll see, Jake, if you open up the files, they have a very long book called, it's their agenda. It's like a 100-page long agenda. It lays out exactly what it is. This map is kind of a visual of it across the timeline. But you can see there's a student genetic passport. So they're really blending eugenic stuff into these educational systems that are essentially, education is your lifelong learning. So there's no getting away from your education. You're just being retrained to the Borg perpetually. And that's sort of what's coming. So anyway, the key piece of this is this idea of new models of human capital investment, promising youth. And they are adopted by pension funds and private investors, okay? So, again, this is nothing new to our country. We have had used people as commodities in ways since the beginning. That's baked into what the United States is, with direct slavery and neo-slavery and Jim Crow and other systems. So this new system is essentially mining people as an investment, but this idea of labor will change. It's no longer, I'm going to, do agricultural work, or I'm going to be in a mine or a slave lumber camp, or this. My understanding of how this machine runs is that your capital will be complying to a world in which most people have been dispossessed of their means of economic survival and livelihood, to do what they're told. And they're risk profiling. Yes. Yeah.
What is a transhumanist?
So transhumanism is a concept where is increasingly people and machines will blend together. And that, and in some ways, I think, like when you see these people are pointing out, like, look, here's a room full of people on all their phones. Like, it's blending our real world into these cloud-based worlds.
I just looked it up.
Yeah.
No. It's Wikipedia says transhumanism is an international philosophical movement that advocates for the transformation of the human condition to developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies to greatly enhance human intellect and physiology.
Yeah. So like remember back in the day was the bionic man, right, or whatever, both augmenting yourself with technology, using your brain. And I think it's interesting. So Werner Vinge was a professor of, he may still be emeritus of mathematics and computer science at UC San Diego. And he was the first person to postulate this singularity. And for the longest time, I felt like, wow, this is incredibly oppressive of people taking over this idea of humans taking over machines taking over human agency. But I think in some ways the people who see a future singularity where machines gain consciousness independent of people almost feel like we need to be transhumanist to be ready when that happens. To fight it, to have enough intellect to fight the singularity. Which is a different framing in that way, but no one's gonna come out and say by the way, we're totally remaking your education system so a few of us can be smart enough to fight the singularity. But it's a different worldview. So there are people out there that feel that this is what's coming, and they're very powerful people. They're some of the most powerful, influential folks in their spheres in multiple countries around the world. And they're making things that say, we're gonna have human capital as an investable commodity. So we should pay attention to that when they say those things, because we have a long history. This is not new. This is a new version, but yeah. So, and then the last piece is, so how do we manage people as human capital? Well, increasingly we're going to have smart cities that are collecting data on us all of the time. I mean, we already have a sense of that. License plate readers, smart telephone poles, all the cameras, these, if you don't have a sticker on the camera on your computer, you should put one there. All of these things are part of the Internet of Things. And I talk about it a little bit as we should be looking at what they're doing with Internet of Things and domestic livestock management, which they're looking at using satellites and collars and electronic fences for dogs. Because ultimately, in this world of sort of mass dispossession of automated labor, they're going to start managing people, the type of people that they don't perceive as being of value or only value as managed in this way, right? And right now it could be your phones. I have a good friend that I organize with who has a long-term health situation and is on disability, but all those benefits are on a phone, right? And that phone for that person is this not unlike this collar. And you have to have this collar for us to come and put hay in your feeder, at the day. So these systems are being refined on certain living entities. We need to have solidarity with our domestic animals with this. Zamyatin, is that Jake? Is that you pronounce it? So I read this book. It's a little dry, I have to say. This is an important book because essentially it's about living in a panopticon, and this idea where people are reduced to numbers and mathematical equations, and behavioral compliance is enforced. But you're not dying in the street, but you don't really have much of yourself. You're just part of this larger organism, and that when you have humanity and you break out of this mold, you become very dangerous. And so that's how this is from the 1920s, I believe. This predates 1984 and all those books, but very few people know this book or talk about this book. The other modern version is Black Mirror. So if y'all haven't read Black Mirror or watched the TV show, it's giving us a little taste. And this particularly, the first time I gave a talk, it was at a social justice conference in New York with the New York City schools. And afterwards, and I don't watch a lot of TV, and I was explaining this, and they said, that's just like that Black Mirror episode. And this is Nosedive, where they're actually rating social credit scoring people on phones and zinging points to each other based on social behaviors, like I had a good experience with you or not. And that your score limits or opens up opportunities for you in the world. And then in this particular circumstance, something goes terribly wrong with this woman. She has a bad day, and it all goes downhill from there, and it ends up in a really bad place. But that these digital systems connected to real world things have consequences. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a few slides, and then I guess we can talk for a minute. So this is what the Tom Vander Ark and the Global Education Futures people view that they would like education to become. Not saying it's all going to happen, but this is their headspace. So remember the humans as an investment commodity. So this is a map. This is also on the GEF page, the Future of Education map. So if you showed that to somebody at the local PTA and said, by 2030, this is school. And they go, what? Like, that doesn't look like school. Like, is there a building? There's no teacher on this. There's some mentors up there and some role models. Okay, this is lifelong learning. There's teaching models, but not actual teachers. Education is linked with preventative health care. Education is built into the family with big data and Internet of Things, robotics, and augmented reality in terms of even in your kitchen. Because again, it's all about the data, the value is in the data. It's built into your communities. You are talent investing, and so you invest and you insure yourself, your reputation. If you hear, like, often I have to say, like, the NPR stations are the best red flags on what's coming. Like, I always, like, who's underwriting these? Like, oh, reputation advisor will keep your online reputation super great. Well, that's because, like, that's all of this that's coming. Like, they know that it's coming, that you would invest in someone's career trajectory. There's I don't have it in here, but and I'll send it a video link. It's called Learning is Earning, and it's all about blockchain credentialing and learning on blockchain, and income sharing agreements, and making online contracts to share your income with your personal investors. And this is actually already underway in Purdue, Back a Boiler. It's called Back a Boiler. It's not on blockchain yet, but you have private contractors invest in your tuition as an offset, and income sharing agreements are getting a lot more traction. But ultimately the plan is to put them on blockchain so that you can't break the contract. So it will not be unlike some of these Jim Crow, structures that we've had. This idea, so that's the insurance, reputation, income sharing, tracking achievements, so that's the badges. But increasingly, achievements will not just be that you have some knowledge or skill in managing equipment, but it will be your behavior, because that's what they really care about. It will come with biometric monitoring. So all these folks running around with Apple Watches and Fitbits to track their steps, like, that's where this is going. And there will be consequences if you don't deliver the data. And I don't know if when all the wildcat strikes were happening, and the wildcat strike in Kentucky, the teacher strike, it was actually precipitated in part, like the straw that broke the camel's back was around their healthcare insurance, because they said if you wouldn't wear a Fitbit and participate in this program, you were going to have to pay a surcharge on your health insurance. And these teachers are already really underpaid, right? And so that they were going to have significant upticks, and they didn't fully understand all of this, but they knew that their behavior, like access to something as basic as healthcare, shouldn't be conditional on surveillance of their behaviors, like their direct physical activities. And big data. So that's, and then this is a build out. This is from KnowledgeWorks. So a lot of this comes from, you should really look at the KnowledgeWorks website and their white papers, because they say exactly what the plan is. KnowledgeWorks came out of Cincinnati. It was connected to Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble was in on the ground floor of this. Procter & Gamble helped invent the Internet of Things. Out of KnowledgeWorks, a program came Strive Together. And Strive Together is this cradle-to-career pipeline program that's now directly in 70 communities across the country, but even more through the United Way program and things called Collective Impact. So in Tulsa, it's Impact Tulsa is the Strive Together affiliate. Now they say they're independent or whatever, and I said, well, do you know about the learning ecosystem? At this event that we attended, I asked someone on staff, I said, do you know about this learning ecosystem? And they said, yes, we do. And I said, well, is that what you're doing? And they said, oh, no, we're not going to do that. And so I said, well, I think what you need to do is tell people that this is happening and then make a public statement that you're not going to do this. Because otherwise, like put your money where your mouth is and say, oh, we think this is a terrible idea. Because if they're not going to say that, then, they're not actually against it. And so in this concept is that you will have a personal path. And again, this is totally in opposition of any kind of community-based relationships between people. And relationships are what sustain us over time, right? Like that you would have, a neighborhood school where people know you. Maybe they taught your mom. Maybe they know your cousin. Like, it's these webs of relationships that keep us as a society holding together. And essentially what they're doing is looking to shred that, make you by yourself in this world that is increasingly scary, and navigate that by yourself with a device that is watching everything you do. Or maybe, you know what I mean? Like, that's that's really what's happening here. So, and they'll say it's personalized and custom to you.
Yeah, this is when they say student-centered learning, and to you, this is what they mean, I think.
Yes,
right?
yes, and they'll say student voice.
Personally, yeah.
That the students, and again, it's not that we don't want people to participate or have a voice, but they're even saying student voice with first graders. And I can't remember, somebody was talking about the first graders being in charge of their own reading learning. These things. Like, how can a first grader, they need guidance, they need support. That doesn't mean you're going to be mean to them, but they don't know what they're first graders. You can respect them as people, but they need help. That's why they go to school. So it's that this education will be delivered across different platforms and learning agents, like a learning agent, that they will provide insight into learning strategies. So this is AI. So this is essentially what we're saying when we're talking about, even thinking about from a more conservative perspective in community control of curriculum. Not only can you not control your curriculum, like at this point it starts out as Summit Basecamp or some corporate curriculum that's delivered online, but in this personalized model, the person sitting there gets something different than the person sitting there. And no one can go back and track what they got, what the basis, when you talk about equity, where's the accountability in that? No one's going to be able to pull that and say, well, the AI recommended these 20 online learning modules for your kid, and they recommended these 20 for this kid, and they're not anything the same. And if it's in a feedback loop and someone fails, and that's the problem with these Khan Academy setups, is that you have to pass certain tests to move on, and kids can never get past the thing, which doesn't say they don't know it, but maybe they can't pass this arbitrary dictated test. They get frustrated, and they just shut down. And they can never get to the next thing, which they might have been great at. But it's these really rigid structures.
And it also, this is something interesting that Tony and I talked about, it also makes it almost impossible for parents to help their kids with schoolwork.
Yeah.
Just on a basic level, you can't really help your kid to work through a math problem or anything like that.
Yeah. And there's also even issues with optics and optometry and screen-based stuff and all of that. Diverse credentials, so that's these blockchain transcripts, and now that's at Union High School, has piloted these alternative transcripts, and it will be lifelong learning. So you can start earning your micro-credentials when you're in pre-K, right? Because you'll just earn them till you're gray. You're just aggregating data onto yourself and your digital identity. And that, and here's they're saying, work will evolve so rapidly that continuous career readiness will be the norm. You'll never get your feet underneath you. This idea that, my parents' generation had a 30-year career and a thing, no. And it's not even that, you'll have 7 jobs over the course of your lifetime. No. You're going to have, you should just plan on, you're just an Amazon Turk TaskRabbit person plugging things together. And people can't hold it together. That's not how people are built. People are not built that way. Anyway, school will take many forms, self-organized. So this is also going after the homeschool communities, the unschooled communities, and Montessori schools. So when you'll probably start hearing things about Montessori schools. And it'll sound great because you're thinking old-timey Montessori. Well, Montessoris are very much about individual activities and self-motivation, doing your own thing, which fits perfectly with this because they'll just stick a little sensor in your slipper and track you that way. So even, like, it's deconstructing things that we've been taught to think of, like, oh, that's quality. Like, that's a quality thing. And it's all being turned inside out. And here's where it specifically says. It says the playlist for this could be public schools, but it could also include digitally mediated place-based learning. So it says you're not going to have a school. You're going to have a drop-in center. This is what the Knowledge Works white papers say. You've got to read them. They say exactly, like, they say what they're doing. I mean, they're very detailed on these projections. But so what I'm saying is, I mentioned earlier that I have one child. We navigated the complexities of this school, the Philadelphia Public Schools, in a way that was advantageous to us. We were fortunate. I have some guilt about that. I tried to sort of leverage our position in that space more broadly. And at the time that I got into all of these, making these decisions or trying to make the decisions, they sort of say, this is the right course. If you're a good parent, these are the things you try to do for your child. And I didn't know all these things. And that's an incredible amount of stress because we have magnet schools, we have, like, they've gutted all the neighborhood high schools, so it's all sort of choice high schools, and you've got to get the score to get the next place. And it was hard, but we only had elementary, and then I had middle and high school. So imagine you're a parent, maybe a single parent, maybe a parent whose English isn't their first language, with a couple of kids, maybe somebody has special needs, maybe you don't have a car, maybe, and this is your school? Like, how does that even work? And what does that mean for people who have, like, maybe people with children with severe physical needs? Like, what does that, and they have to work. What does that even look like? And the other thing that I had talked about, I have a post on my blog called Navigating Whiteness, which is, what does that mean when we know that these environments that our children are operating in, particularly black and brown kids who don't feel safe, who are being targeted and racially profiled in spaces where they are perceived as they don't belong, are navigating with devices where we know children have been murdered just because they have, like, and men, with a phone in places they're allowed to be, and this happens to them. So we're going to do this? We should talk about that. Like, we should definitely all be talking about this before this happens, because there's tremendous consequences. And to do this slow slide and buy their jargon, it's just really...
Actually, I just want to say one thing. If you go back to that slide. So this is a radical transformation of the understanding of what school is and so forth. So, for example, I mean, if you look at the university level, but also obviously primary schools, grade schools, whatever, the schools are the repository of a tradition, of a heritage, of a culture. To be educated is to adapt to school, not vice versa.
Yeah.
Because what's happening here is, it's as if we've got these little uneducated, this reminds me of the TU mission statement, right? You have a voice, you desire to be heard, we're going to tailor it to you. So, I mean, the political implications are huge, right? Because education is a way of binding people into a community where they have things held in common and so forth. And you're right, this atomizes everybody, but it's absolutely opposite to the notion of education as assimilating the precious heritage of culture and tradition and the past and being part of a larger story of humanity, right? This is actually just taking somebody and saying, oh, you have your own personal desires or something, and that's why it's so insidious, right? Because it looks like it's real freedom. It's all
But
about
it's under surveillance,
right.
Too.
But right, but so actually student-centered in this way, right, is this kind of almost like autistic, which is totally opposite of education, because what education is here you have a little kid, you don't know anything. Mm-hmm. We're going to teach you mathematics, we're going to teach you reading, we're going to open you up to a world, rather than have the world tailored to you in your little shell where you don't connect with anyone.
But I mean, the flip side of that is, like, the educational system has always been structured to serve the economy, like compulsory education.
Right.
So different people have access they've been assimilated to different systems, like, intentionally. So that's the other piece, is coming up with a more equitable access to knowledge so that people are empowered to do, no matter who you are, and it's not true that people have access to an equivalent education, because clearly in Philadelphia, like, I've seen it firsthand, you don't. even within public systems,
But
you don't
this
have
just
access.
actually gives up on the whole notion of coming out of a dark cave into a shared world.
And I think
That's
the
the
sharing,
point I'm trying to
and I
make.
think, and this is also speaks, I think, somewhat to the youth movement and the pressure around like Greta and the climate challenge and these different things, is like, it's wonderful for youth to have this, but in functioning communities, it is about interconnection across generations
Right.
and knowledges, and that everyone can learn from others.
Right.
So that the elders can learn from the youth should learn from the elders, but to disconnect the youth off and say they're the answer, outside of having these larger life, they don't have the same life experience, right? And so we need to be just very cognizant of what we're learning, where we're learning, who's learning. But this leaves people alone, and I think makes certain people vulnerable to predation, not just to data, but to these social systems that preference some people over others.
You know, now they've got to reestablish that generational connection. You have impact studies where you have young people teaching elderly people how to use the tech. Have you seen
Oh yeah.
this?
Oh yeah.
How to what?
How to use the tech in the most efficient
It's all digitally mediated,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, and just
So
to make
you're
that
gonna destroy like these
authentic.
authentic organic connections between young and old, and then you're going to put them back together.
Well,
like-
the old folks have to also code the virtual world,
Yes.
Julianne. They've got their part to play. They need that training data clean. So everybody's got to pull their weight in this lifelong learning continuum. It's only until you're in the grave that you get to stop. So this is just another one from KnowledgeWorks. But so it's linking biometrics to learning delivery to payment systems. And this is the key that's important to understand, is that, so they're normalizing this, that this child not only is interacting with an online mentor, okay? And the creepy thing about this is like how it slides in. I have a friend who a couple years ago said they knew someone in, I believe it was the Detroit area public schools, that they were having second graders pulled out of class time with their teacher and put in the computer lab to do online tutoring with corporate volunteers. Okay, so this wasn't after school, this wasn't extra. They were being taken from their trained teacher, put in with volunteers, but one of the programs that was supporting this, corporate volunteers supporting this program, was Booz Allen Hamilton, which is, state surveillance security systems, right? So why would you take children in this way? But it's essentially to create an impact program for this. So, this could be a AI avatar. This maybe could be a synthetic person, or this could be Booz Allen Hamilton, anybody on this tablet, talking to this kid, and then tracking their actual biometric response rates, which is super creepy. And then they'll say, oh, this child had a good growth on whatever metric they set, and it's all fake. And then so with their ID badge, they can unlock learning opportunities in places like libraries. So here we are in a maker center. I think they have one upstairs, and learning hubs. And they have transactions like transferring money from their accounts and gathering distributed data, performance data. So these systems are rolling, and this is what we have to understand when we talk about school funding and they'll talk about student-centered funding. That's why. The student-centered funding and the weighted funding formulas, which I do agree that students who come into schools that are coming from poverty, that need additional support in language instruction, that have special needs, need more stuff. Like, surely they need more stuff. But the way the funding systems are being set up is that there will be a small window of time in which that money may go to districts to actually support children in schools. But then it will ultimately go to these e-wallets of education opportunities, and this is being advanced by conservative and liberal entities, and this exists already in Arizona as a debit card. Not yet an e-wallet, but an ESA debit card, these education savings accounts, that will make the most vulnerable people the biggest targets, because their money will be the biggest, right? So these predatory systems that are coming after, and the impact investors, and these people are alone in the little world of the GEF KnowledgeWorks world. Who's going to support them and keep those children from being harmed by these data mining systems? Is terrible. So this is the other thing about beacons, and right now this is being used largely geofencing for advertising purposes, and like push notifications like, hey, you're strolling down like the cute art districts, and they push you a thing like, ooh, like you get a coupon if you come in for a drink or whatever, like when you're in the zone, and it's tied to GIS and whatever, and it pops up. And I think you have to opt into it maybe. But they're using this in museums now for education. So you don't just go to a museum with your class on a field trip, is they'll say like, oh, download the app and you'll interact with the content through a QR code or even these beacons. And maybe there was one upstairs, Julianne. I don't know what that, doesn't that remind you of that weird thing upstairs? Like this, you walk into a zone and it, boop, here's some information about this thing. But it's always mediated, and it's not like maybe you have your own time to interact with this object. Like they're just gonna tell you what to think about it. And this information goes on. And then these are the Wildflower Montessori schools, the slippers. So they've got Internet of Things sensors in the slippers to track the kids, who plays with who, how long, who's talking to the teacher, who does the teacher talk to, and where they are in the classrooms, because then they've got sensors on all the, like, man, you're in the block table too much. I think you really need to go in the reading corner. And they'll say, well, it's all important. We really care about social relationships and what people are doing in the classroom. We need all this data. No, you don't. You don't. This was an MIT dad, and now this is a franchise. This is a Montessori franchise. Okay, so these vouchers are probably going to go to these Montessori franchise schools. And it looks pretty. It's branded. I mean, it's got a wool rug. There's got natural light and some wood blocks, but it's all painted with Internet of Things paint. Like it's just a mess. I mean, and maybe not yet. Maybe we've got a bit of time. And then all of the data that is going on, it's important to understand the infrastructure. So this is called XAPI technology, or tin can. So this is tracking tech developments. So the first step was cloud-based computing. You didn't go to the computer lab for an hour a couple times a week. You had the Chromebook carts because you had the cloud-based computing. So the data that came out of programs like Dreambox and Chief 3000 that were delivered through like a laptop interface, that could be uploaded to a learning locker through something called SCORM. It was developed through the Defense Department, Shareable Content Object Reference Module, okay? But it didn't work on a phone, and it didn't work on a tablet, and it didn't work on a slipper, and it didn't work, and they're like, that's not enough. Because eventually we're not even gonna have screens, you're just gonna have augmented reality glasses, and how do we get that information? So then they developed Tin Can XAPI, which essentially tracks competencies, like that you've done things, up into your learning locker, but everything has to be reduced to a noun, verb, object statement. It's like education, if it doesn't fit in there, everything is reductive. So it's like, we watched it the other night, this person read this book, this person watched this video, this person finished basic training, this person did emergency delivery of water, and everything is reduced to that. It's a thing, it's quantifiable, it's in there, but it's also, we can track it. So that was what was so upsetting, is when you look at it, we know every book you read, we know what you checked out, we know when you checked it out, we know like what came of that, like if there was a test. It's very insidious. Okay, BrainCo, Harvard. Harvard developed this. They did it, they sent it to China, and China finally kicked it out, but it's coming back. I think it's in some Catholic schools maybe. You should check it out. Classroom economics. So this is, again, training people for these alternative economic systems tied to behavior. So Class Dojo is the big one lots of folks know about. There's been quite a bit of pushback about Class Dojo, and I have a colleague who, and it's hard because they condition kids, right? And kids want to fit in. And she was holding out, and then her 5th grader said, like, could you please let me do it, because I just want to have the avatar. And this thing is like, you can buy virtual world items for your avatar with behavior points. So like you can buy fun outfits for your avatar, like with behavior points. And this is a 5th grader, like this is not a little kid, but they train them up, and she's like, I'm really left out, like everybody has this thing and I don't have this thing. And I even remember back when like my child was younger, we had Webkins, which were these little stuffed animals with a code, and you would set up a virtual world with the code, and you would do like gem mining or like play little games and earn things to furnish rooms. And so when we talk about capitalism like coming up against the wall, no, it turned into Webkins. Like it's turned into virtual economies. And we missed that part. But they're actually, this augmented reality world that's being overlaid, it's already been colonized with capital, property ownership, and value, but it's just not concrete. It's virtual. They want to put all that data into patterns and make the predictions. So this is big data analytics. This is Yet Analytics. They're working with Hewlett Packard on something called EIDCC. It's like artificial intelligence, human capital speculation for global markets. And the thing about Hewlett Packard that's really scary is they originated the early flight scoring to like look at their executives and see who was at risk of leaving the company. And so they would like give you a raise if they thought you were going to go somewhere else, but if you weren't perceived as valuable, then they wouldn't really give you any extra money. And they developed these equations to do that. And so now these technologies are being used to risk profile in lots of other ways and being used for global markets. But so you can see Bloomberg here. It's all about these the analytics, virtual reality training, workforce training. So this is the thing, when I was looking at the ecosystems, I have some friends in North Dakota. North Dakota is being taken over by all of this. They're reducing grades, they're moving to competency-based education. The pilot school district superintendent says, you know, starting juniors in high school, they should be out learning what they're gonna do, or at least knowing what they don't wanna do. And by the time they're seniors, I don't even wanna see them in school. They shouldn't even be in school, okay? They should just be out learning what they don't wanna do, like in some work-based learning. And I'm like, well, okay, so this learning ecosystem, what does that look like in North Dakota? Because I live in downtown Philadelphia. Like, honestly, we got a ton of stuff you could earn some cool badges on. Like, if you were into the badges, like, we got all the good stuff. So all the people who fled Philadelphia to go to the suburbs, like, you're out of luck because we got all the good stuff. Like, you got Chili's and we got the art museum, right? But what does that look like in North Dakota? Like, I don't get it. Like, where's the stuff? Well, it's in your virtual reality headset. That's where it is in North Dakota. You jump in your virtual reality headset and you train in your project-based learning spaces. Because you can be anywhere in a virtual reality headset. You can come to the art museum, right? Virtually. And that's where their things are going. Now this kid is being trained. This is from JCA Solutions, which is in Orlando. It's a defense contractor. And this is linked to competency-based education fulfillment. So this is early conceptual. So this is like a kid being trained for a warehouse job. And this is augmented reality. So you don't actually have to know how to work the equipment. You'll just hold up a device and then it will tell you what buttons to push, because you're working this part of this thing one day, next week you're working some other part of the machine. We don't actually really want you to know how it works, because then you might, actually have some knowledge. We just want to keep you unsettled, keep you moving around. And then this is the information they're pulling off of these haptics. And people, when they talk about, oh, VR, it's really cool, like Google Glasses, like, or what cardboard, Google Cardboard, it's like a field trip. No, there's a lot more going on there and people don't get. So this competency, this is also JCA, this is the same slide share. This was about petting a dog. Can you properly pet a dog? Okay, so you can make it any task, but they said, this is the end result. We want you to be able to properly pet a strange dog. Let's break that down into pieces. What things do you need to do to know that we know that you can do this task? And then we're going to track it. So they want to know, did they complete the tasks in the right order? Were you nervous? Did they know which dogs to pet? Which dogs did they choose? Which steps did they miss? Where were they looking when they were petting the dog? I think one of them was like, did they not pet any dogs? Did they pet the dogs too long? Right? All of that was the stuff they wanted to know, and they were pulling off the haptics. Like that kid didn't have the haptics, the hand things, but the VR headsets, motion, heart rate, audio, their location, if they completed the tasks. And there are all of these things being measured. And so when we talk about competency-based education, essentially competency-based education is like, did you complete the task? Education is reduced to a check a box. All of these discrete tasks is nothing about synthesizing knowledge. Did you do the thing we told you to do? And none of it's in any order. It's almost like Pokemon Go, that you're just running around doing tasks that they tell you to do to earn enough points to get access, to get the privileges. But that's important. And then I had talked about XAPI. So we're a city of LRNG. LRNG is a program of collective shift, which came out of the MacArthur Foundation. The MacArthur Foundation has poured hundreds of millions of dollars for over 10 years into promoting digital media and learning, okay? And they've hired frameworks, social scientists to create books to tell us that what we want is digital media and learning. And their idea is that you can learn anywhere, the city is your classroom. Now, like when I was a kid, I would think that's cool. Like we get to go on field trips, we get to do these things. But the more I understand what it is, it's not that at all. And so this XAPI is a playlist of experiences. You earn badges. It goes in your learning locker. There are about a dozen cities of LRNG, and most of them are smart cities too. So this isn't fully launched yet. It's been like simmering because they really need digital identity to push it. It's running through the summer work programs, the summer youth work programs, and the after school programs. And actually, it started in our libraries. Our libraries were used, and we had like a teen lounge, and you could come in for summer programs and earn badges. And it was connected to something called digital on-ramps, which came out of Chicago Public Library System. They piloted it, and then it came into here. It's in Dallas, it's in San Diego, it's a number of other cities. And it didn't really work, and they were like, oh, that didn't work. Like, that's done. No, it's not done. It's like Google Glass. It's not done. They're refining their technique, and it'll be tied to the digital payments. So for us, our first Smart City grant in the city of Philadelphia was in 2011. It was by IBM, and it was like, what would you think a Smart City grant would be, like your first one? Like, I don't know, like smart light posts or smart parking meters, I don't know, something. It was human capital management. Our first Smart City program was called Digital On-Ramps, and it was to create like harmonized digital citizens for workforce development. And it was done with our mayor's wife, who was in charge of our career academies. So that was 2011, okay? And then it's gone on from there, and then we got big belly trash cans. But like, it's about the badging. And this is in San Jose, and the LRNG is actually is connected to LinkedIn. So LinkedIn will be all part of this. And if you understand that LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft, when you know that Microsoft also owns Minecraft, you can see the ways in which virtual world building and behaviors and credentialing start to all come together. This is the other piece. In this world they're building, they really want to know what kind of person you are, and I think we can sense that from all of the social behavioral tracking things that are coming out of TU and coming into the public schools, that they really want behavioral data. They want social emotional data. They're going to collect this stuff because like the stuff I'm talking about, like, it's hard, right? Like, it's hard to think about it. Even if it starts happening, we already know people are super stressed. People are under a tremendous amount of stress. Even people who are relatively privileged are under a lot of psychic stress of what's happening. They know people are going to just start falling apart. So they want to know, okay, are you gritty? Are you resilient? Are you a bounce back person? Because if we're going to invest in your human capital, and there's not many people who are going to be doing the work, that's who we need. We need the gritty people. So they start doing things like this Mastery Transcript Consortium, which is at posh private schools. This thing is coming through the Exeter, like the fancy ones, because essentially the kids at all those schools, they're not going to need a Mastery Transcript because they're going to know somebody. They'll never get their job through the AI hiring algorithm because they know the people. But they would like for the poor folks to be like, I want what the rich folks got. Give me that Mastery Transcript. This looks great. Look at how awesome this is. We deserve that. And they want us to ask for it. So that's why it's running through the private schools. And they're measuring things like Joseph Smith here is, he's at the Hawkins School in Ohio, because all this smart city stuff is coming out of Ohio, that he is, he's not quite persistent, 3, but he's very much of a leader who can coordinate tasks and delegate, right? They want to know what Joe is going to do. Or not really Joe, but Joe's the front for this system. They want to know who the troublemakers are, who the go-alongers are, who are your good change agents. We need a lot of change agents. Who are the people who are good prospects for being change agents? And I will say a lot of this is social impact investing. My child's high school is one of if you believe in that sort of thing, high-performing, high-testing schools in the state of Pennsylvania. They were one of the incubators for Wharton had a social investment program called, it was Seeds, something about seeds, and they recruited out of their school. They want those kids to do that work because then they won't question it. But this is the learning record store here. You can see VR, in-classroom business, because it's lifelong, online forums, comments, mobile devices, e-learning, web pages, simulations, videos, games, learning management systems. So it's all going into here. And ultimately, this is Mechanical Turk. The Mechanical Turk Amazon is like, look, you can still get human intelligence. You access a global on-demand 24/7 workforce. So they need the badges to feed this. Because ultimately, once everybody has the badges, we're not just competing against the other people in our city with our credentials. We're competing against people in the Philippines, people in Korea, people in Russia. Whoever has those badges and those online credentials, we're competing for that online job. It's total, like the economic shift that's coming. And I think that's what TPP was about, the intellectual property framework systems. I think there was a new NAFTA just got revised. And I don't know enough, like I don't claim to be knowledgeable, but like my instincts tell me that these systems of free trade are related to knowledge capital and human capital management. So yeah, so this is out of Steve Rothschild. He developed the first government-based, outcomes-based contracting with Art Rolnick of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve in the mid-90s. And they developed the system tied to workers in the Twin Cities who displaced workers. And so this publication is part of the Federal Reserve, and the San Francisco Fed has been a real leader in pushing the human capital impact bonds. These are these loan agreements that I'm talking about, and this is from GEF, but it is just so egregious. So this is a future thing. This isn't current, but they're talking about people-naires. So like this, we're fighting the billionaire class at this point, but they're talking about fortunes made up of people, and that the fortune size depends on the quality of the human capital, right? That is really terrible. Like before any of this Impact Tulsa goes forward, we need to pull this up and say, listen, this is what they're talking about. This is what powerful people in the world are talking about, people that you're rubbing shoulders with. Is this what we're doing? I don't think most people want this to be the thing that we're doing. It's terrible. So just as an overview, we've got fragmented understanding. We've lost control of the curriculum. Kids are being isolated. The mental health is like not good. Kids are being profiled through these econometric systems. The behaviors data is being collected. They're being fed to these terrible economic systems. And then any creativity that we might have to get out of that feedback loop, they're never going to have access to tap into, or the self-confidence to believe in themselves, to do that work, to imagine another future. They'll just be locked in because every other alternative will be foreclosed. You'll only be fed as if it were permanent. And again, I don't mean to convey that I don't think it is. I think there are too many cracks in the system that if anybody just threw up people near to a room of influential people and said, hey, let's talk about this. Like the people would rise up eventually if they knew, if we could get more than 10 people here, but they would. So how's this work? Human capital futures. This is the money slide, and this is the only place I've actually found it in writing. But this is Ready Nation. Ready Nation came out of America's Promise Alliance. And in 2018, this is November, they held this global investment gathering of pre-K investing that no pre-K people could come to without business backing. And they rang the NASDAQ bell and they announced we are the era of human capital investing. And it's pre-K and workforce development. So we're bookending it at this point. We're the early kids and we're the late kids. So they brought people in. This was global. The people tied to IXO and the AMPLI Digital Blockchain Identity Act were there. The mayor from Boa Vista was there. Deloitte, KPMG, all the big players were in this room. You know, you can look it up online. It's connected to Pew. Sarah Watson is the Pew contact. She was at Pew for a long time in Philadelphia. And then she's now the global connection for Ready Nation. But they say that they're going to create social impact bonds for early childhood and workforce development. And then they're going to be able to be bought and sold, that debt. And they're going to trade it, and they're going to package it as asset-backed securities. And that's exactly what led to the housing crisis, okay? So if we understand the logic of the machine, and again, I'm trying to say this isn't political because this is going forth with both political parties and has been for quite some time. It's a matter of global capital, okay? It's a matter of we have extreme wealth inequality where a very few people hold most of the wealth, but they cannot continue to accrue wealth to themselves without circulating their capital. And how do they do it if most people, knowing what's coming with automation, will not have access to liquidity? Like they will be tapped out in their credit markets. They won't be able to buy enough stuff to keep making Jack Ma and Jeff Bezos rich. They can't. So if you can commodify them and trade them as a security and give them just enough to get by and to control them, because you also know that once the automation happens, things are all going to start to fall apart. So right this week, Davos, they're all here. Stakeholder capitalism is the theme. We're in the era of stakeholder capitalism. Right? capitalism, it cannot hold, oh, we gotta fix it. They're gonna fix it with the freaking social impact bonds on human capital. And what that does, I mean, this is our reality, right? Like, this is our reality, is economic control and police control. The education piece, this is all tied in with the UN Sustainability Development Goals. I'm not a climate change denier. I think we've totally screwed up our planet. But the solutions that are being put forth by the UN on behalf of Microsoft and Accenture are all tech-based solutions, which do not compute with real sustainability. And in number 4, which is education, they're saying they want ICT technology, so individual communication, which isn't even a laptop, it's a phone or a tablet. And this is Bridges International, this is Facebook in Africa, that they're going to essentially maximize the full potential of ICT tech for formal, non-formal, and informal education. And they're going to make it equitable and give everybody devices. So what does that mean for the child labor in Congo that are pulling the minerals out for these batteries, right? What does that mean? That isn't right. Like, it isn't just, and it isn't education, but it serves the need of the stakeholder capitalist class. Lumina, I know, has been very involved in the Tulsa area. This is on the back end, the workforce development. This has been restructured by Jobs for the Future. Lumina Foundation has given them $20 million. I believe the Gates Foundation has given them $120 million. Millions and millions and millions of dollars to create this infrastructure. Now, Lumina Tulsa is the talent hub. Y'all are talent hub as of 2017. They're partnering with, this is last October 2018, Robin Hood, who's a super evil guy, Paul Tudor Jones, with the Harlem Children's Zone, and Salesforce, which is, again, working with Border Patrol and state security, and also Jack Ma and Sesame Credit on human capital. They're going to do the human capital impact investing. Okay? So we are in service of these people. Lumina is a front, and it's also student debt. So you're keeping people under control through perpetual debt. This reskilling is perpetual, small amounts of debt. Someone who wouldn't take out loans for $80,000 in higher ed, but they'll have to take out 500, 200, whatever for these online terrible classes to get these badges.
Yeah, just to show you how it ties in locally, Salesforce, there's an exec at Salesforce who is in the Too Small to Fail advisory board with George Kaiser. And
Okay.
I can't remember, I don't think it's Binoff, I think it's somebody else, but you just look on the advisory group for the Too Small to Fail, and here's George Kaiser, and here's Salesforce guy, and there might be a Lumina person too.
Yeah, and there's a couple of competing ones, like so Balmer Group has connections to Social Suite, which is another dashboard, social service dashboard program.
I wanted to know the play on words at the gathering place that Kaiser put a lot of money into. At the very end, there's a light show, and they have the globe come up. Have you seen the light show? And it says the illuminated ones, the ones that are more illuminated, and I wondered if the Lumina Foundation comes from Illuminated or Illuminati. Is that a possibility?
I don't know. I always tell people I just wish my midlife crisis did not involve the Illuminati. Unfortunately, it seems like, I don't know, but I mean, there's a lot of symbolism. I mean, these people play on words, play on concepts, play on art. I mean, I think a lot of it is there's sort of probably insider jokes, right? Like if you're in Davos, if you have that seat, you probably see things. I kind of say I see the world with almost like augmented reality because I know all of these things, so I can come in and say, oh, you have these badges, here, and the guy was saying, like, we used to have some badges, or it's coming, they've talked about it. So it's like the more information you have, the more insider jokes you can see more deeply of the thing. So, but I don't know. So who's making these deals? I'm sure there are many people, but locally I bumped into this organization, which is Ridge Lane Limited Partners. It is essentially a merchant banking firm, and Ridge is Tom Ridge, so our former Pennsylvania governor and the first director of Homeland Security. And R. Brad Lane, who's like this younger guy, and I don't know, he's got a special appointment at Stanford doing some sort of brain science, which is scary. So they have 4 divisions that they're essentially brokering these public-private partnership deals that are going to come online, and their focuses are real estate, sustainability, which is the UN SDGs, education, and IT. Okay, so they have 12 former governors, bipartisan. They have high-level military and intelligence community folks. They have a number of education advisors. Our superintendent used to be on one of their education advisors, okay, until I went in and I was like, wait a minute. How can you be advising a company, a corporate, and a merchant banking firm when you're a public superintendent? That's a terrible conflict of interest. And they're like, well, I only participate in conference calls a couple times a month about, work development or whatever. And then I FOIA'd the information and I never really got it, but then he dropped off. And he got replaced by Tom Vander Ark. Imagine that, right? Maybe that was actually a bad outcome on that. But Michael Crow is on there, Paul LeBlanc, the main movers and shakers in the ed tech, from the education side of things. I'm sure people who understand IT would be able to look at the IT things better. But essentially, it's almost like a shadow government that's setting up what's actually happening, what's being planned. So these are the things they're saying for education. They're going to transform it. They're going to do workforce. They're going to align financial incentives. They're going to have appropriate technology, and then efficacy data analytics. So that's the impact investing piece. And look, whole child lifelong learning. So we want to know your behaviors, and we want to know it. You're never getting out of our clutches. We're going to know it all the time. So, this one is I had given this slide in Washington, but both Gridgore and Locke were both Seattle, Washington folks. So this is very far along in Seattle. Colorado and Seattle are the two ones that are adopting the Swiss model apprenticeship program and blockchain credentialing. So they're the early two connectors there, is Colorado and Washington State. So again, I just want to emphasize, none of this would work in terms of, it's not a true free market in any respect. It's being propped up by philanthropy. It's being propped up by institutions of higher education who are developing policies, who are stamping them and giving them legitimacy. It's being undergirded by all of this philanthropy. So this is called a Capital Aggregation Fund, and this is Blue Meridian. So their focus is early childhood, but you can see it pretty much is like there's $10 million players and $50 million players in this mix. And you can kind of see how it spreads out across. But you've got folks locally, both the Kaiser Family Foundation and the Schusterman Family Foundation are both in this mix of the 9 key Blue Meridian investors. Steve Ballmer, who is former Microsoft, is tied into, he's one of the investors, and his wife is on the board of Strive, which is affiliated with Impact Tulsa. And what the Ballmer Group has done is they've come up with something called Social Solutions, which is social work software. There's also Social Suite, which is funded by Salesforce. So Social Suite, Social Solutions, it's putting people on dashboards, and increasingly it's not just about, because it's always about the data is the value and the predictive profiling, but it is wraparound services. So we go into low-income communities, and it's not just that your child is doing cognitive or non-cognitive thing on a tablet. If you're housing insecure, if you have addiction, if you have these other things, that data is being woven in as well. And increasingly, through a community school model in the K-12 situation, because the FERPA has gutted the data security for kids in there, when you start doing mental health screenings and delivering telemedicine in a school setting, FERPA is much less safe than HIPAA in terms of protecting data, because many people can act on behalf of the school districts as their officials, and changes were made under the Obama administration. So these dashboard systems are really key, and also thinking about behind these dashboard systems, the contracting mechanisms for human capital are going to be linking in the major accounting firms and law firms. There's a huge market right now in setting up the infrastructure of digital contracting systems, but that are tied to performance metrics. And so it's the data going on the dashboard, and then it's the reimbursement backing out so that the people who've made the investment can document the impact and get their payout. And so I came up from Dallas. There's stuff going on in Dallas around Dallas County Promise, where Impact Tulsa just went. It's their free college, quote unquote. Mike Marath is down there, and he's with TEA and very much a big player in social impact bonds. His background was in pre-K USDA reimbursement for food, but he cornered the market on software to do reimbursement in pre-K, a contractual system. Now it's attendance, right? So these folks, Bergam was really good on accounting software, so we have to keep an eye on the accounting firms, because they're the ones that are the middlemen to make the deals, to verify the deals, and make the money flow where it needs to flow. Okay, so this is Robert McChesney. He's a professor of communication at Urbana-Champaign, I believe. He wrote a book a while back with John Nichols from The Nation, I think, called People Get Ready to Fight Against a Jobless Economy and a Citizenless Democracy. And this was recorded in Seattle. It's interesting. They're a little bit more hopeful than I am about things, but in the context of this talk, this is the automation. He talked about automation, and one of his PhD students, they went to Davos. They got an invitation to Davos, and they're like, wow, like if you actually get in Davos, like the world the information you have access to is very different from what we have access to out here. But he said one of his PhD students had been in a meeting with a German industry executive about automation. It came up in the audience, like, should we really be so worried? Like, I'm hearing a lot about this automation. Like, should we be worried about this? And he said, well, you know, we could actually automate all of our factories tomorrow, but the German middle class would burn. Like that's it's saying, you know, it's. And he, the CEO, said, not only is it serious, we have the capacity right now to completely automate every factory we have in the world, including Germany. And he said, but we can't do it politically right now. That's the only thing that is stopping us because, and this is the quote, translated from German, if we were to automate our factories in Germany, the middle class would burn. Social order would collapse. That is how serious it was in his view. So, and this is 2016, and like I don't know exactly when the student was there. So like we're now 4 or 5 years out from that, and now we're hearing stakeholder capitalism. We're starting to hear Yang talk about UBI. They're like, okay, this is coming. How do we do it without it burning, right? How do we do this without it burning? And I think that this impact investing and the data analytics are a big part of that. And the thing that's important to know about MacArthur when I was talking about City of Learning and collective shift and LRNG is that it's really important to know the history. So MacArthur's money actually came from insurance, okay? He was like one of the largest, like one of the most wealthy people, like in the top 5 back in the 50s, and the money was insurance money. So again, when we're looking at players in these systems, it's the people who, the entities that have backgrounds in risk profiling and making predictions. Because if this is what they say is coming, like from official sources, then it's these people who are running in the intelligence community to make predictions in advance. So, mass dispossession. I'm not saying this is all going to happen, but this is how they're thinking this. If they accomplish this, the people in power, who have very concentrated power, they want to keep making money, and they want to control the system. Like they don't want to die, and they want to keep getting richer. Like those are sort of the two main things that they have going on. How can they do that? So the control people, like we're increasingly seeing high-tech policing, like, but they're also softening it up because it's like the social worker police. And like we just got Portland's police chief. Y'all got a new police chief. I think you're going to start hearing a lot more about like, let us like put you in diversion programs and put you on pathways to these impact opportunities. So you never get off the pathway, but like whatever. And on the flip side, then you have like robotic things. So this is Boston Dynamics robot Spot Dog. And the Boston Police Department is now using this it's not weaponized yet. There's not a weapon on this dog yet, but like break down doors and go peek around so that the real police officers don't get hurt. So this is a semi-autonomous robot with somewhat remote control and somewhat self-functioning. Clearly drones are everywhere. We're seeing a lot of drones in Philly, and like the international police chiefs are like, if we can just get the policies right in the next 10 years, we're gonna have drone nests all over public buildings in all the cities. Now, not to freak you out, but like this is one of the things I stumbled into when but the Army TRADOC, the Army Military Command, they actually have a division called the Mad Scientist Division. Like not joking, like it's like the Mad Scientist Division. Here's the projections for mega city urban warfare. Like we're gonna have mega cities and we're gonna have urban warfare, and what does that look like, and what size tanks do we need? And they're talking about it like that, like and this was for public distribution. Like I'm not saying I didn't break in anywhere and like get access to this secret document. They're like, for public distribution, the Mad Scientist Urban Megacity Warfare Program. I work near Pennovation. Penn has a contract with the U.S. Army to do distributed intelligence, hive mind drones. Okay? They're building it. I drive by it on my way to work. This is actually happening. So we need to get our head around how do we, and this is all happening within the context of outsourced government, big data government that we can't get to. Like y'all who have been fighting the Tulsa public school situation, you realize how hard it is even when you can go in person and pressure, like exert your will on people the extent that they just have like a virtual wall up. They're just not going to respond to you. And now this is what we've got. Like in South Dakota, they're talking about putting that you can, well, the Wi-Fi sniffing, so you put all your benefits on a digital voucher on a phone, you go to a protest, who's there? Sniff, your benefits are zapped. They're talking about South Dakota that you can have non-lethal drones. Like, are they the new stun guns? They've got like directed energy weapons. I know, I don't want to be saying this, but somebody needs to say this. So this is just like, this is, okay, how will it not burn? Well, they'll say, well, are you going to behave, or is the robot dog going to come visit your house? The other piece is economic control, so I think that's UBI. And Gates is behind this. Is called Better Than Cash Alliance. It's global. A lot of this is running through global aid systems, and they're saying that we want to move to a digital currency system, and that's going to enable them to unhitch it off of fiat currency in terms of a true globalized system. And they're saying the way to start, like our way into this, is that we're going to digitize public benefits, okay? We need to get public benefits on digital systems, and that's the leader. That's how we're getting it started. So that's UBI. This is coming through global aid systems, digital identity, and resource allocation. So they're already using it, and they're justifying it in like really racist ways to sort of say, well, we have to track the aid because those people are corrupt, right? Like those people that are getting the aid. Like we need it on blockchain. We need it secure. And they also say, oh, well, if you're a refugee and you have to run out in the middle of the night, as long as we have your retinal scan, you can get groceries at the store, don't worry. And that's how the global aid plays into it. But Australia now is putting their disability benefits on blockchain. So I don't know if you're aware, in the past month or so, they've talked about it's very challenging to get SSI, and to go through that process is very protracted to get long-term disability. Now they're saying you have to do it every 2 years. And people are just like, we can't. Like, we could already do it the first time. What does that look like? And I think they create a disaster, then they swoop in and say, here's the answer. Well, you won't have to do it every 2 years if we hook you into our digital identity system, and then we'll know. And maybe if you wear a Fitbit, and we'll know if you fall in your apartment or you have a health problem. Like, we'll be able to track you and monitor your disability, and make sure you're okay, and make sure we're paying for what we really want to pay for, right? And that's how these systems, and again, it hasn't all happened. It hasn't all happened, but why would it not, knowing what the dynamic is in place? So this is the digital identity setup. This is their conceptualization. If you look up self-sovereign identity, there's a ton. Like the Decentralized Identity Foundation has like 60 members. Evernym is one of them. That's the Illinois group. But they want your border crossings, which if you think of geofencing, and this is what I keep saying, I believe that Gaza is the test bed as an open air prison. And a lot of these technology systems have been developed in concert with biometrics at the borders with Israel. And this idea of open air control of populations, imagine you connect geofencing, like the advertising geofencing and social credit scoring, with your digital identity. And right now, actually in smart city environments, I just found out in the last month working on prison reform that in China, Foshan, there is a division of a city that's tracking people on parole on blockchain through smart cities and tying it to their social credit score. So they are like, whether you have a physical fence or a digital fence, these ideas of borders are really important, because like, what if your fence becomes like, we can't leave this room, right? Like, some people can leave this room, some people can go downtown, some people can't. What does that look like, right? Depending on your behavioral mindset, right? You might be a risk if you go downtown. I don't think you should. You go downtown, you lose your snap. And I'm saying we just should be unpacking the ethics of all these before we do them. This is how capitalism jumps into the virtual world. Your property rights, which increasingly you are your property, whether or not how much of yourself you own, right? Do you fully own yourself, or does someone else have a share of you? Yeah. Becomes that, right? It's your registering, your voting, your aid, your certifications. So this global task platform labor, TaskRabbit labor, if you're going after the job against someone in Korea, someone is in Norway, like, as long as you all have the same certification as global certification, y'all can compete. It's all good. E-signatures, and I think, Julianne, do you want to say something about the avatar, the people acting on behalf of your
Yes,
virtual?
so Oklahoma is sort of leading the way in telepresencing, and we had, I think it was just last year, the state legislature passed a telepresencing bill that allows your avatar to do business in the same way that you would do business in person.
Yeah.
Yes.
Telepresence.
And
Yeah.
I believe that was Nathan Dahm, who's a Republican, and he worked with a guy, maybe Matthews is his name, out of ORU, and they together put this bill together, and it passed. And ORU is leading blockchain credentialing at the higher ed level right now too. So
Yeah.
it's all sort of connected.
And I always just say it like telepresence, like telemedicine. So I'm in Philadelphia. We have a lot of very good research hospitals. Jefferson Hospital is one of, it's a teaching university. If you go to the ER, you're probably going to see a doctor on a screen. Okay? We're not in Alaska. We're not in some rural area. Why is the doctor on a screen in downtown Philadelphia? Like, where is that doctor? Are they somewhere else in the building? Are they in the city? Like, but once you have a certification, you can just as long as the doctor meets some threshold of quality, you can that doctor can be anywhere. And eventually the idea is like you don't actually go, like when you have these really long emergency waits, they don't actually want you to come in. They'll just say, well, here's a kit, here's a thermometer, here's your phone, here's a thing. We'll remotely do an assessment of you. Don't come in. Just you can be your own doctor through our mediated devices. And part of that is not necessarily because it's any better, but if you're creating these impact deals that are driven by data, every single interaction has to be mediated through the cloud, or it won't count towards those deals. So every social relationship, every social worker, healthcare provider, teacher, and that's why I think if we can figure out how to communicate it, like no one wants to be in that world. Like I don't know any social worker who wants to sit at a dashboard and not talk to people and have people do the brainwave headbands and virtual reality CBT therapy. Like nobody wants that, but we have to figure out like to make it actually seem like it could happen, and let people know.
This telemedicine here, I don't know. At TU, you had an option to pay for like a $25 telemedicine visit with your doc if you wanted an emergency consult, but didn't want to leave the house. So they were offering it as a benefit at that time last year. And also, I think they did it at my husband's company too. So,
I mean, and there is something to be said by the convenience until that's the only option. Like, you don't get to see a real doctor. Or only, and there's like a concierge model I've heard of that, like, if you're rich enough, you can actually pay to see a real doctor. And that's what will be in education. If you're rich enough, you can be paid to be taught by a human being. If you're rich enough, everybody else gets the impact version because stakeholder capitalism. So this just speaks to our digital on-ramps. This was our Smart City grant. So talking about this harmonized digital citizen. And in Austin, they're putting unhoused folks on blockchain. So the stuff that's in, and they're saying it's convenience because, when you're on the street, it's hard to hold on your documents, and that you need that. You won't be able to have services unless you have but essentially those people are being used to create data lakes for impact investors. And a lot of this is being run through Texas. It's systems engineering, really. It's human systems engineering and social systems engineering. And now that they have the technologies to do it, they're really, it's going a lot faster. And this is funded by Bloomberg, by the way. So y'all have Bloomberg too in your,
And Allison, would you mind just to sort of define blockchain, because it's a really tough concept to get. So
yeah, okay. So I will, and I can send the link to this, but essentially, if you sometimes like you do something a little naughty when you're a kid, and you're that's going to go on your permanent record. You better watch out. That'll be on your permanent. And you're like, oh, there's like no permanent record. Like blockchain is your permanent record. And essentially blockchain is a decentralized, distributed ledger. So it's a counting ledger. And it's really interesting because if you think about it, because I keep talking about the doctrine of discovery, that like double entry bookkeeping came at the same time as the age of exploration and the rise of trafficking of human beings, right? The slave trade that came out of the Catholic Church. It was the Catholic Church that invented double entry bookkeeping. Or he didn't invent it. It was probably in Africa earlier. And then they repackaged it for the Western world and to track shipments and maritime trade. And for blockchain, it's very fascinating. A lot of this is coming out of the United Kingdom. They're very far advanced because they have a social welfare state, and this is all being baked in to the existing social welfare state and corrupting it all. But the blockchain law systems are being based in London because it is the center of maritime trade. And so there's something, and if people who may know more or have contacts with the law, I would love to know more about that, but it's about tracking commodities. And it's the kind of commodities, it's a long, really brutal history of the commodities that are being tracked on these ledgers. So now we have digital ledgers, and they say that it's secure because instead of being in one place, like on your hard drive or in a cloud, in a server farm somewhere, it's spread out everywhere. And this came up in about 2008, and supposedly this entity called Satoshi Nakamoto. Nobody knows who that is or what it is, right? I mean, how convenient, right? On the heels of the housing crisis, boom, here all of a sudden we have blockchain, and it's super interesting, and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And most people, when you talk about it, they'll be like, oh, the Bitcoin thing. And I'm like, yeah, but the Bitcoin's only the tiny bit. And they're like, oh, that doesn't work. That's the Bitcoin stuff. That's like, darknet or whatever. I'm like, well, it is a part of it because it is about global value exchange. But essentially what's more important is this idea of commodifying digital assets in virtual space. It's virtual property ownership is what it is. And increasingly, it will hold data connected to Internet of Things, how you interact with smart environments. So it will be all of these sort of chunkier items, like that you would think your e-banking and your e-health and whatever, which are kind of, your marriage certificate, these things that are, significant chunks. But it will also hold stuff like, maybe you're parking at the garage and me plugging in my USB and like different other things that will be exponentially scaled for the risk analytics. So the other thing is it can hold value, so it can hold payments. So it can hold the records, but it can also link these records to stored value that you have in whatever form that takes. And I increasingly am saying that it's not necessarily dollars, but it's like script, like behavioral script, like exchange points. Like, the kid with the wristband where they're zinging the kid points. Oh, if you earn 50 points, you get a homework pass, right? What is that equivalency in adult communities of poor people? Yeah.
So would you say something? It's like tracking human electronic habits.
It is tracking, and I think it's also the piece not only of tracking but activating like privileges, like that it's tracking you, and I'm not a gamer, but I understand this is almost like gamifying life, that if you comply in certain ways, opportunities will be available to you, right? And it's actually, that's always been this way in life, right? Like if you behave a certain way, opportunities are open to you if you're a certain kind of person. And so it's not totally new, but it's becoming more automated.
For marketing purposes?
I think it's essentially, if we understand it as engineering systems, but where people are the systems. Engineering people.
Does their character traits go on that blockchain?
Well, probably, yeah. Your behaviors, your behavioral data that will go in there when you're a kid. And it's your permanent record. So the digital identity that was set up in Cape Town, which is called Ampli, which people know about in Philadelphia, and that's why I asked at that Impact Tulsa event, were people aware of blockchain identity for pre-K? And they agreed. They said that they were both aware of blockchain identity for pre-K, and I'll show you that they were aware of surveillance play tables for pre-K. So they were aware of both of those things. But I think no one's going to talk about Ampli pre-K and the Hatch Education pre-K surveillance play tables in the Impact Tulsa fancy party with balloons, because it's unseemly, right, to talk about putting preschoolers or maybe even unborn children on blockchain, right? But I think that there's some way that we can start to talk about it, as community members, as moms, to just like cut that crap out. Like we can tell them, and we can say we're not doing it, because they're not counting on somebody like me showing up to tell you in time. So y'all are getting the digital driver's license. So I think that's part of it, is the digital phone. So like if you think about what it means, so when we're talking about an augmented reality world, this company that's doing your digital driver's license is talking about augmented identity, and that is what it is. So, and these were, when I was saying the Decentralized Identity Foundation, and this is being set up with Tim Berners-Lee and the World Wide Web. It is global. A lot of this is pretty far advanced. In like Nordic countries, actually, where the social welfare states are, like there are little payment apps. I mean, I have a friend who said like, oh, if you have to take off work to take care of your sick kid, you just log it through the app and your payment still comes in, right? And it's these kind of normalized transactions that are super convenient, right, in the moment, that they ride on the rails of this. But, you know, we've got IDEO, Uport, Blockstack, IBM, Microsoft, you know, British Columbia Ministry of Children's Services, where my kid is in school, right? Danube Tech, Moody, Evernym. Evernym is running the Chicago Blockchain Task Force. So there I have 3 tabs. So there's like 60 different entities that are involved. But I think y'all might be the first digital identity program coming online. Pardon me? Oh yeah, it's all, I mean, all of that and the driver's license scanning systems. But if you think about when your driver's license lives on your phone, it has all the metadata of where you were, right? Like what if there's a crime? Like what if they pull you over and it's like, oh, there was a crime, there was a robbery, you know, half a block away, your car fits that description. You know, maybe there's some thing you plug in your phone to pull that metadata and like convict you based on metadata that you were perpetrated a crime. Like, again, I'm not saying all of these things are happening, but before we do this, there should be some ethical conversations.
And just here in Tulsa, I mean, or in Oklahoma, we have, so we've got the pilot for the digital driver's license. We also have My Health Access Network, which is all of the electronic medical records, serviced by that's all the same people, if you know who I mean. They're in the schools, they're in the county health departments, they are...
And the veterans.
They're in,
Yes, because unhoused too, overlapping,
yes.
With the vets, because the Bank of America is very big on impact investing with veterans. And like, again, oh, you have PTSD, well, let me send you a VR headset.
Yes.
With some therapy. Right?
HUD, yeah. So all of our government services, especially because, you know, Mayor Bynum is doing this Results for America.
Which is Moneyball government.
Yes. You know, we're farming everything out. And the same, you know, Kaiser is invested in all of these tech companies, Accenture, you know, the health access networks, the Simeo, like, it's all related.
So imagine, like, again, just the context. They're talking about, okay, well, we could do this, but the German middle class will burn, and this is coming, or whatever. Like, the Davos people know this. It's like, well, how do we make people behave? Well, if you have a chronic illness and your health care benefits are on this, you're not going to step out of line if you're if you have diabetes, and you're not going to be able to get your medicine if you speak up. Like, it's a very, and you might not even have to say it, but it'll be very clear. Like, who's going to do that if you've got your income sharing agreement or your food stamps? Like, will people, like, before this locks down, we have to talk about it. So the system I'm talking about is all essentially, I pulled this off of a Minority Report, right? Like pre-crime. The impact investing is based on pre-crime. If not pre-crime, pre-social burden, right? It's profiling people into be burdens on society and putting a number on that. And the profiling will increasingly include your zip code, right? Maybe your genomics, your parents' educational attainment, right? Different aspects, even unborn, they'll start profiling, like, and then you can hear that, like, this child will do better if they're in this zip code determines this child's future. You'll hear all of this language, which is not to say that there isn't some truth in that, but they're saying it because it's going to be a risk profiling factor. And the cost offsets that they're going to claim, so how this works is that they say, we've predictably profiled you against these various items, each of which has a cost. Maybe you have 1, maybe you have 5. This is where the ACEs scores comes in, the adverse childhood experiences and the rubrics, because childhood trauma impacts so many diffuse areas. And so if you can intervene in that, you can pull profit out of each sector, right? You can say, because I fixed you before you were traumatized, or I fixed your trauma early, you didn't become addicted, you didn't become unemployed, you didn't become incarcerated, so I get credit and bits of money off of all those pieces. So traumatized children become a real attractive investment option, right? But when you create that, and what I'm saying is when you create global impact commodities, you're never incentivized to stop childhood trauma. You're just incentivized to grow it and manage it profitably.
And we have a bill that I don't think it has not been signed into law yet, and I could look up the number, but there is a bill at the Oklahoma State Legislature right now that says that parents are required to report any visits to like a behavioral health or psychological health provider. You're required to report that to the school. Right now. For your child, but it'll probably extend to yourself also. I mean, that's right now.
And parenting. And this is actually, so I wrote a big piece about ACEs. Again, I'm not disputing the science of it. I mean, in my own family, I've seen impacts of childhood trauma. I'm not saying that it's not real, but especially epigenetic trauma, that's going to be tied in with eugenics and the pre-crime element, is that with the scoring and rubrics, that was developed by Kaiser Permanente, who's putting $1 billion, like a bunch of money into impact investing around housing. And they're a pot of money. These insurance premiums are a pot of money that have to spin, right? So why is it a rubric? Why can't you just care for people not as a commodity? Because once you create these impact metrics, essentially that gives you free rein to spy on them indefinitely, right? Did you become addicted? How long do you get before you can prove that you're never gonna be addicted? Do you have to be 50, 60, 70? When do you get to stop? When does that stop? So, and I will say I attended an event at the Dirksen Senate building in Washington when they launched this Social Impact Partnerships Pay for Results Act. And it's seed money to get all this started. Because again, it's not a free market, it's propped up. And the government is investing in these pay for success programs. It was a room of like twice this size, packed. I was like, my friend and I were the only regular folks in there. And it was all people with nonprofits who were going to benefit because the nonprofits have all been bought out by Hewlett Packard through strategic philanthropy to become data-driven service providers. And even the arts and cultural institutions are becoming data-driven institutions. And the people who were touting these programs, the main speakers, this was in a couple years ago, so they were all Republicans. They were Republican senators, they were all Republicans. The panel, they were all Obama policy people, right? And the head of Goldman Sachs, who had instituted the pre-K social impact bond, was in the room. And I had made these little flyers, and I'll show you in a minute, these surveillance play tables, which are going to capture the data. I said, don't put children on these surveillance play tables. What are you thinking? But before I did that, I got the first question, and I said, listen, I know the state of Massachusetts is looking at social emotional learning and like as an offset, like middle school curriculum is an offset against addiction. Like, but don't you think, like, when you're doing pre-K and saying the cutoff for the data is kindergarten enrollment, well, then those kids are being tracked for a couple years at most, and then they get off the tracking when they're in kindergarten. That's the impact. That's where they say, oh, this worked or it didn't work. What does it look like for addiction with a middle schooler? Like, what if you get swept into that you were never going to be addicted, but you were profiled as going to be addicted? When does it stop? And then at the end, they misunderstood. They thought I was trying to figure it out, like to make it work. I had 2 different people with business cards going, we have equations for that. Would you like to talk to us about it? And I said, this is terrible. Like, they couldn't imagine someone would be in the room and think that was a bad idea. And it was hundreds of people. And both sides. And like, that's why I'm coming to Tulsa, because it's got to be like moms and regular. I mean, people who are moms and people who care, because what they're planning is evil.
And
is super evil.
Here in Oklahoma, we have those kinds of organizations already operative at the state level. We have I2E, which is they work with a seed fund. I have to remember how it works, but there's OCAS, Oklahoma. You can look it up. Ostrad, I2E, there's a bunch of seed funds. Just look at the oklahoma.gov and we've got it all.
There's a lot. And it's being framed like that's the problem. Like, again, do I want people to have these services? Yes. Do I want people to have stable shelter? Yes. Do I want them to have health care? Prenatal care? Yes. Not like this.
Yeah.
Not like this. So just this is like my little diagram. But it runs on austerity. Again, I think a lot of this has been like in the lead up over the last decade after the housing crisis and the disruption of everything, is that it created the seedbed for these tremendous needs, right? People with unstable housing, people who never got their feet back under them after that, like who used to have one stable job and now have 2 jobs and drive Instacart and Uber. You have the outcomes contracts. The success that they set is never meaningful, because if they did, it would solve the problem and then their impact market would go away, right? So they pick the success metric, say for education, as a test score. We know a 3rd grade test score. I mean, it may, but it isn't real education. It means you can take that test better or learn to take that test better. The investors front the nonprofits or for the service and technology service, the money. And then the debt on that is securitized. And like I said, that's where the big money is to be made. Not in the deal, but in the securitization is my belief, because that's the way it was with the mortgages. That allows you to monitor people and to turn them into data. And then this third party does a review to make it look legit. So I'm saying in Santa Clara, California, where in Silicon Valley, there's 4 of these deals going on. And right now we're all in developing proofs of concept to scale. They're like, how do we scale it? How do we scale it? Social impact bonds didn't scale. Let's try pay for success. Can we get this to scale? Let's put some SIPR money in there. Can we make it work? Third sector, running around the country, getting these things to work, trying to line up the community foundations to pump the money in to get this thing to work. So Santa Clara has a pre-K, a literacy, a mental health, and a housing social impact bond. Okay, so they've got at least 4. They're not all social impact bonds. Some are called social impact bonds, but they're all outcomes-based social service contracting systems. The jumpstart for that was through Catholic Relief Services and Santa Clara University. So a lot of this is running through the Jesuit universities and through Catholic social services, but also the Jewish relief services, like these large, there's a faith-based component, which is not to say individual people within this machine don't have their heart in the right place, but the machine is a corrupt machine. So in Santa Clara, both the mental health and the housing social pay for success programs, the deal reviewer to say this is a good deal, this is how the outcomes were, you made the money or you didn't, is Palantir. Okay, so I talked about Peter Thiel, we talked about his connections to policing, surveillance, and intelligence. And imagine you're a person in Silicon Valley and someone in your extended family doesn't have their papers and you need a place to stay. And now Palantir's running your data. What does that do to you, right? What position does that put you in with your 4-year-old, right, of needing housing? That you know that this is, and they probably don't even know that this is happening. But the other piece is the mental health. It's called Partners in Wellness, and it's through telecare. There was a national conference in 2018 around scaling and patient compliance in mental health systems, and I have to get the actual word because I just found this, but this person, I believe it was Gail Lapidus, who's connected here in Tulsa, was talking about being partnered with telecare. Okay, so again, we're saying the things that happen in Santa Clara have very direct ties to Tulsa, and then we have to be paying attention to these proofs of concept all over. So either the deal is paid or not paid. And a lot of them, they keep saying, we're going to pay for what works government, because this is great. We're only paying if it works. Well, once you securitize it and you're trading it on global markets, somebody's shorting it. We know how that goes. It's not going to work. Somebody's going to bet it doesn't work. And a lot of this crap actually won't work. So essentially, we're incentivizing having people bet against us, our humanity, which is terrible. It's just so. The other thing is when you look at people as numbers and investable, the people heir, right? Who are you going to get? You want somebody you can fix cheaply and who will make you look good. And we know how that plays out with charters and creaming and deciding who comes in. You pick the people you think, well, it's logical. So if you have someone who's really traumatized and doesn't have a lot of upward prospects, and you've built all this data in your data analytics, you're not gonna let them in your program. And if you have someone who's really not that bad off and doesn't have a lot of upward potential, whatever. You want the person who's fixable. And that's where the grit, that's where the resilience, getting those data analytics, because that's the bang for your buck. Like, look at that. Like, that person might even offset a couple of these other people to find their way into your thing if their numbers are good enough. On the social service dashboard that Microsoft is running and Salesforce is running. So this is run on equations, and this is where I say that higher education is so complicit in all of this. Like, not the whole thing, but individuals, they're legitimizing these equations. They're saying that we're pairing our social science with finance, okay? And we're saying, this is Jim Heckman, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, and he's on my shit list. He's a terrible human being, and he's saying that based on all his research, he can guarantee you, normally it says a 7 to 10% rate of return, but 13 with health impacts, which means smart playgrounds and Fitbits, if you invest in early pre-K. But in this gathering, so he's funded by the Pritzkers, J.P. Pritzker, who's the current governor of Illinois. Heckman is funded by Open Society and Soros, which is crazy because he's at the Becker-Friedman School of Economics, and people are always like, no, it's all together. Open Society is funding people at, the Chicago boys, and they come with this thing. So they're going up and down the California, pitching it to community foundations. Hey, this looks pretty good. You got a pretty good return on your investment, and you are doing good at the same time. Isn't that excellent? And so this is from this talk that they gave. I believe it was in San Diego, and this is, so this is Heckman following up. He said, so even when we think we can't boost IQ, because that might be difficult because the rank is stable and your ranking in the IQ distribution is pretty well established, as JB was saying, around 8, 9, or 10 or somewhere like that. So they're saying that doesn't work for a hedge fund. Like even if you actually believed in IQ, it doesn't move. That's not gonna be good for us. But character skills, now there you go. They're more manipulable, I think she said, but like malleable. And they are actually our target of opportunity. So character is our opportunity target. So we need a deeper understanding, and I think when we go in and look at what the economic and social benefits are of these interventions, we'll have a deeper, more comprehensive evaluation system looking at cognitive and non-cognitive skills. So they're like, okay, we can change behavior, we can change character, and we can do it on video games. We can make that data go exactly the way we want it. We can engineer these people as numbers in a video game.
I was just thinking, hi, sir, you know how it pops out of you.
Uh-huh.
It's just popping out. Thank you.
Oh, does it make sense?
No, I mean, these little, they say thank you and please.
Oh,
and that,
yeah.
But their character is really not please and thank you. They really might be very they might have real destructive behavior, but they're puppeting out what they're supposed to sound like.
Yeah.
It's manipulation.
I mean, it's social. It's not authentic human.
Yeah.
It's mediated
It's
for this
robotic.
data. So this is Daniel Tiger's Tea Party. This is, have you ever wondered where all these PBS Kids apps came from? Like, why are you putting kids on apps when they're like, in the grocery line? Oh, because they'll be kindergarten ready if we just give them the right apps, because they'll ABC Mouse, all this stuff, right? Well, Daniel Tiger, if you do the Tea Party game, they check and see if you're sharing. Did you share your cookies? I don't think you're sharing. Why don't you try again? Right? You don't share, it goes in your permanent record, right? For your future profiling that you're a non-sharer, or maybe you're sharing too much with your best friend and not with other people. Like, it's crazy that this would be, but here they're saying this is our target of opportunity. There's a whole set of videos that I watched that are in the oak paneled room at the University of Chicago that Heckman brought in all of these global researchers, including many from UCLA Crest, people doing research with the Defense Department, saying like, we need to invest in pre-K so that the kids can pass the ASVAB and drive the tanks, okay? And we need for parents to use these apps and make the kids use these apps, and they use the apps, and they won't cooperate, and they won't make time for these apps, and we're really upset. And Heckman says, well, okay, you're treating these parents like they're actually like experts, and they're not. They don't know anything. You should gamify it. You should gamify it for those parents, meaning Head Start parents, right? Like low income. You should gamify it, but you need good incentives. You need some good incentives, like pornography. Pornography. I said you should have some good, just joking about the pornography, but really you need some good incentives for the gamification for those parents to make them use our app so they can get their return. And this is on video on the University of Chicago webpage, but they don't expect anybody's actually going to watch it. And they have the guy from UCLA Crest saying these interfaces are like what we use with the military in simulations for training riflemen. It's human computer systems engineering. It's not really so different from what we're doing in pre-K. Just the same stuff, right? It's just the same stuff. So I'm at an event with the head of community relations for our NPR station. And she's a black woman in her 60s. And I said, listen, I found this out. This is terrible. You guys got to stop being connected with this stuff. It's going to be really bad, especially for black and brown kids. We know this was not going to go well. And she just looked at me and she said, well, what do you want me to do? I mean, we all take the money. We all take the money. And this was a room full of people in the media. She said, we all take them. What do you, I mean, I'm like, well, I have a blog and I don't take the money. I think people should know this. And she said, well, I built my career on Ford Foundation grants. Right? So I may seem like an unlikely person to have to deliver this message, but I can't not tell people.
And so my kid goes to parochial school, and I watched this video, and on Allison's blog, she's been kind enough to provide you a transcript. And the process of building a character and unlocking these things, my 8.5-year-old son came home and described to me that very process on a game that he was using at a parochial school.
Yeah.
And it changes with the seasons. So you'll have a Christmas thing, and you're building a Christmas character. And my kid is the only kid who's not allowed
That's
to.
transhumanism, really. When you're turning yourself, you're investing
Yes.
your identity into an avatar.
Yeah. So you're doing this, and he's the only one who can't use it, and all the other parents are looking at me like I'm crazy, and the teachers are. I'm like, look, this is exactly what he's described.
And they're using Fred Rogers, who was I can't believe Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is up there.
I know.
And he's the one who's more people person.
Well, it's hard. So this is the thing. And you do this research. So WGBH Boston in the early public broadcasting system was the head of MIT. It was the head of MIT. And it was actually started with Carnegie money. It was the original public-private partnership. And so this stuff is running I don't want these things to be true, but so the MacArthur Foundation funded something called the 100 Million and Change program, and it was competition to solve a global problem. And you had to write a submission and have a 90-second video, and Angela Duckworth at Penn was a submitter, and they were going to help us make good choices with technology, right? But she didn't win because she only had her test subjects were New York City schools and Philly schools and KIPP. And so that wasn't a big enough test bed. The people that won the first prize, it was the International Rescue Commission, IRC, and Sesame Workshop, and IBM, and the Behavioral Nudge Unit of the UK, working with Syrian refugee children, putting AI tablets, literacy tablets, in the hands of those children and those families to data mine them. Okay? And Sesame Workshop now has a Sesame Venture Capital Fund. And Joan Gans Cooney, who's been with it since the beginning, is all into gamification in all of these California-based and Arizona State gamified simulation systems. And her husband, Peter Peterson, I think he was very conservative, gutting Social Security, everything. So I don't want these things to be true. And people will troll me and tell me I'm terrible to say this about Sesame. And I'm not saying it. I'm just saying this happened. There's no denying that this happened. Why does Sesame Street have a venture capital fund that would work with IBM, which has ties to the Holocaust and Hollerith cards and profiling, and using it in refugee populations again, where they're targeting communities? Who's looking out for them, right? Like Tim Geithner's the board chair of the IRC. Who's looking out for those people? And if you understand manufacturing consent and Noam Chomsky and the way in which media, it's disheartening, but I have to believe that we can believe in each other because we have to. So it was all in Harlem Children's Zone. It's been going on. Jeffrey Canada, this is their book of 168 pages of equations. If you give a poor kid glasses, this is the cost benefit. If you solve their mom's addiction, this is the cost benefit. It's ledgers from enslavement. It's neo-slavery. Okay, I'm just saying it. The money feeding into that is Paul Tudor Jones, one of the largest hedge fund investors. He's close friends with Druckenmiller, and this is all running through the Promise Zone. So Harlem Children's Zone, Canada is now consulting to the Promise Zones, which are all part of HUD and redevelopment programs. This is him. This is Tudor Jones. He got his start in cotton futures. Okay? It's cotton futures. It's very clear what this story is. But this is the cost-benefit ratios. To assign a dollar figure to the amount of philanthropic good that a grant does per dollar cost, and can be used to compare the impact of one grant against another. It's not just going to be about comparing grants. It's about setting up stakeholder capitalism. There's lots of other equations. Teachers College, Columbia did one on social emotional curriculum. Rand did one on prison education because they're setting prisoners up to be data mined by ed tech. Laird is in the UK. He had a cost offset for mental health, and they scaled NHS mental health treatment. But it was with it gets unemployment, right, for depression. And so what they did was they set up a lot of CBT therapy, digital teletherapy, and they had pop-up drop-in happiness centers in places in the UK. And actually, you can look it up in The Guardian. There's an article. It's called like the IKEA of the mind. And it was like pop in, get your mental health treatment. That has to be digital, and supportive housing is another one. So all of these like esteemed universities are doing the equations. This came out of Pay for Success, is embedded in ESSA, and they specifically say America Forward is the social entrepreneur vulture philanthropy that they advanced getting this in the ESSA, and that they're a portfolio, they want measurable outcomes, high impact learning technologies. So this is in 2014. The Obama administration asked for like suggestions around pull mechanisms for high impact technology. So clearly Pay for Success is directly linked to the technology and the evidence. So when you hear growth, continuous improvement, it's about picture that little dash, the little line. It's just, and I think Daryl said it really well yesterday. He talked about continuous improvement doesn't mean you're actually where you need to be. Like if you've miseducated someone so that a child who should be reading on a 6th grade level is reading on a 3rd grade level, and you can get them to a 4th grade level, well, for the Pay for Success people, that's great. But they're still not where they need to be. And you're not really incentivized to get them where because probably the payment will be the same if it's just to check the box that you got them past this threshold, whether you got them to 4th grade or 6th grade. You're not actually, in fact, you don't want to because you'd like another deal that you can move them from 4th grade to 5th grade. You repackage them. It's a management system. So the measurements, only things count that can be quantified. The success is data. It always has a price. It's profiling. It has to be scalable. And then what really stinks is all our kids are going to have to do this. Like, if you're not the oppressed, you're the oppressor. So even professional class kids, they go to college, they get then congratulations, you get to oppress other people on a dashboard. So it's not maybe as bad as being the oppressed person, but it's pretty terrible to have to do, like, no teachers, that's why everybody's leaving teaching. That's why people are leaving these professions, because they don't want to do this to other people. So it's collective liberation, is what, like, why is somebody like me here? It's collective liberation. We have to, and it's based in that history. And then here's this is the data lake. All the data has to touch. Oh my gosh, I'm losing my power. It's coming out of Silicon Valley. The NYU is running these data labs that are at Penn, Brown, University of Chicago. There's one in the UK. There's one outside in Washington State that's connected with Evergreen. These are the surveillance play tables, okay? This is me in the meeting. Being like, what are you doing? Like, I'm like, these are the Obama people. This is the Goldman Sachs lady. I'm like, don't do it. Like, it's like me and my little piece of paper. Don't do this against all these people. And we're like, here, let me give you a business card. I got an equation for that. I got a good equation for that. But they're going to try. These are little cameras. These are fisheye cameras. And the thing about CAP Tulsa is that they want more data always. It's not enough to have the kid's data. You want the parent's data. Wow. You want to engineer the kid and the parent. You got the parent on the workforce pathway. You got the kid on the cradle to career pathway. They're at different points on their pathway, but you're managing all of them, and that's the systems engineering point. So here's from a video about CAP Tulsa, where it specifically references Heckman. He says there's anywhere from a 7 to 13% return on investment, and that's a CAP Tulsa video. Okay. There's the blockchain ID. This is amply saying we'll put you can build social capital. Whereas the system generates trustworthy, rich transactional data. By encrypting the data and storing it within a child's personal data store, a detailed record can be built up over time. Valuable data assets can be derived to benefit the individual and population-based data analysis. And these are these self-sovereign. So it's data assets become verifiable claims, and that's what Mike Morath is, that's what these smart contracts are on blockchain, and it's all going to be automated against these equations. So yeah, so Cap Tulsa, this is again this guy who was involved through Northwestern, Hirokawa Yoshizaga, whatever.
Oh,
he's at
he's
Northwestern.
been
He's been here. Okay, so he worked on Head Start, and he's connected to Open Society and the number 4 UN Sustainability Development Goal.
What does CAP stand for?
Community action.
Community action.
Project?
I got mine.
Oh, okay.
Oh. So it's like the context. This came out of KnowledgeWorks, so that's the ecosystem. Procter & Gamble helped get that started. They developed Internet of Things. The ecosystems are all the badges. Strive came out of KnowledgeWorks. The whole community school model came out of both Cincinnati and Strive. It's intersected with United Way. So United Way is scaling this through ALICE, which is Assets Limited Income Constrained Employed, which is their permanent raw material underclass society, which is the working poor,
Wow.
and they're collectively impacting them, okay? So these collective impact programs were inspired by Strive, so that's what Impact Tulsa is, but these are in at least 70 communities plus more because some of them are just called collective impact, like Spokane. Doesn't have Strive, but it has collective impact. So there's Alice. It came out of the Northern New Jersey United Way, which has ties to Cory Booker. Cory Booker was part of CIPRA. He's working with Mark Zuckerberg. Mark
So that's how
Zuckerberg.
these poor people get so rich in government.
Yep, they're the oppressors. They know to keep their mouth shut. So these are just some of the things that I know of generally in Oklahoma: the social engineering summit, Cap Tulsa, the STEM stuff, the reentry. There's stuff around reentry services. A lot of the prison reform stuff is happening, and I have a blog post about that. That it's diversion courts are setting up impact investing. Not that I want people to stay in jail, but the diversion courts are part of this. The birth to 8 strategy, the safety and justice piece, and next up, the economic mobility piece. It is part of Bloomberg, What Works Government, and this is happening all over the country where they're saying this child would have better outcomes if they moved away out of their neighborhood to some other neighborhood. And they're actually engineering them out. So, but not together, and not in unison, but just like fragmenting those so that they can be colonized by gentrification and dispossession. And this is Pennsylvania, so you can see how similar. So these are our Pay for Success from 2013: foster care, juvenile justice, mental health, home visits, pre-K, supportive housing, and job readiness. So there's a lot of similarities. The same thing is happening in every community across the country. And it's also happening in Scotland, it's happening in the Netherlands, it's happening through the global aid systems, it's happening everywhere. And so I just want to re-emphasize about community schools. It's not what you think. Like, people think these kids need help, and I think there was a woman in the group the other day that she's like, how do we get kids what they need? It isn't with this, it's not with the blockchain identity. We have to stop that part, because otherwise they're not going to get real health care. They're going to get a doctor on a screen and an Internet of Things thermometer, right? They're not going to get actual support. They're going to get a VR headset. They're not going to get the things they need. They're going to be commodified in all those different ways. And the ones that are most harmed will be, oh, I think it's done. It died. I guess this is my cutoff.
Is there a way to plug it in just through a USB or do you?
Oh, you know what? I wonder.
Because
Let me
I
see.
have those-
You know what? I actually have my cord. You guys are probably exhausted. I'm so sorry. This is just so much. You know what, Julianne? I think I have it.
You got it?
Oh, I did remember to bring it. I never thought it would go this long, but y'all are champs for sticking with me. But it's a lot, and it's hard to distill down into just one thing. Let me see. Well, we got. And this gets cut down from 130 slides. Come on. It might just take a minute.
Did you bring your books with you, or how did you get your book?
My book. I don't have a book. Everyone tells me I need to write a book.
Oh,
I'm like, I don't have time to write a book. I have to write 8 more articles on prison reform and Medicaid. I haven't even started on blockchain healthcare records.
So where would we find you?
So I have a blog, which
blog.
is wrenching the gears, and I'll send out a link to the slides.
But you, you gave us a bunch of handouts. Is that
Yeah. It's on the back one. Come on, wake up. It might just take a minute because I may be totally wore out, or maybe this outlet doesn't work. Let me see. Okay. I see that it looks like it's thinking. I might have just worn it all the way down. Oh, okay, there we go. Look, okay. Oh, this is my favorite one. Okay. Okay, so we talked about community schools. Continue to the internet. Great, I think I'm on the internet. Okay, so this is, oh no. Okay, this is the cast of characters. I mean, just so y'all realize I'm not making any of this up. Like, this is my giant map. So these are, I could probably put out 100 of these folks, but these are people who just come to mind. So Bill Drayton, this idea of a cost offset is really embedded almost within the carbon emissions trading schemes, because it's all a construct. It's like a mathematical construct where you apply a real life thing and you can create financial structures around it. So he was the first social entrepreneur back in the 80s, and he started Ashoka. So, and Ashoka is also incubates a bunch of change agents and fellows to go do these things and feel good about themselves because they're helping the world, right? While they're getting rich. So he was sort of at the beginning. The outcomes-based contracts actually came out of Minneapolis, St. Paul. So Art Rolnick, who was the chief research economist for the Minneapolis Fed, and Stephen Rothschild was a former General Mills executive who ended up running this like re-entry kind of work-based program for unemployed men. And they're like, we're gonna make a government contract that's outcomes-based. And then they set that up in the mid-90s. And that is the same time that also out of the Twin Cities, the charter school movement came, right at the same time. So these things are tracking along, because really it's both about disruption, unsettling the present, like breaking things up, breaking up the current systems, and then extracting value in different ways, but leading up to this premise that you can discipline people, you can control people, you can turn to a data, that if you think about the data piece, it's always been the public schools versus, it's all numbers, right? When we compare, when we have these meetings, we say, well, look, the charter schools did this score, the public schools did this score. It's all data. It's conditioned us through No Child Left Behind to equate education that you could put it on a number. And I'm not saying the numbers are totally irrelevant, that there isn't definitely education inequity, but it has conditioned us for this next phase, right, for the last 15 years. So test bed in Harlem Children's Zone, the Andy Casey Foundation is central to all of this. They actually launched Mission Investors Exchange, which was one of the early global impact investing sort of consortiums, and they were part of the Kids Count Data Center, right? And so essentially, Kids Count. And at the time, of course we want data. Like I'm not anti-knowledge, but the way in which the plan was to use this data. So the thing about Casey that's good to know is when I was looking, I'm like, why is their board almost all UPS executives? That's a little weird. Like usually like on a board it's like 2/3 and Casey was a courier in Seattle, and his mom was a single mom, and he got his wealth building UPS. And then he went into foster care philanthropy, right? And so now that's what built. So when we think about tracking, right, we think about supply chain and tracking and movement. Casey Foundation and UPS, like they're very good at lean production and efficiencies and movement, right? They're very good at using that corporate. So it's layered into Casey. Before I found Art Rolnick and Stephen Rothschild, I thought Judith started global impact investing. She was a former president of Penn, and when she left Penn, she went to the Rockefeller Foundation. So what the Rockefeller Foundation was, they created the rules of the game, and they created the Global Impact Investment Network, GIIN, in 2007. Again, convenient timing, right as the housing crisis started. And they framed the rules. They funded what's called the B-Lab, Benefits Corporation. I assume after Davos we'll be hearing lots more about benefit corporations, because there are things like Ben and Jerry's and these things. Like what I sort of say is it's this veneer of like fair trade textiles and shade-grown coffee, but like that's covering over this depth of like corruption of our public systems, right? But they'll be like, oh look, it's they're helpful. KIP is actually incorporated as a benefit corporation, an alt school, right? They say that they're doing well, and there are certain elements. They're this perfect entity for this public-private partnership. There's a corporation that says that they're about community values, and they have this standard. And I think there's something in, and I would love a little legal help on this, about the way in which their board is accountable or not accountable that frees them up. And there's an interesting paper that says charter schools should clean up their act, this is out of BYU, by becoming a benefit corporation, because that will make them look legitimate. But don't do it in Delaware, because their law is really crap. There's a lot of loopholes, and that law doesn't really mean anything. Well, of course, Delaware is where they all incorporate. So I need someone to look at the Delaware B Corp law. And that's also where blockchain, healthcare records and blockchain is happening in Delaware. So Bloomberg is data-driven government, what works government. All of that, Bloomberg Philanthropies is a huge piece. And again, he's funding change agents, he's funding Fuse Core, he's funding smart cities, he's funding results. You know, he has a new program in Israel with change agents in 12 Israeli cities. So the tentacles are really broad. Ronald Cohen is the father of British venture capital. He's a Harvard MBA, and he was the first creator of social impact bond. They used the lottery proceeds from, I think it was unclaimed treasury accounts in the UK. Like if no one claimed this money over time, there's this big pool of money. We should use this for the public good. And they created the big lottery foundation and seeded social impact bonds. And so the first one was Peterborough Prison in, I believe, 2006 maybe? Because again, mass incarceration is the biggest cost offset. And now we're in the process of changing out, like when we can incarcerate the world, right? With geofencing and some drones and things, we don't actually, who wants to build, the rich don't want to build physical prisons for all the people who are going to be put out of work by the robots. That's too many. They don't want to build that. And they don't really want to pay that many guards either. So if they can control all the people who are going to be in the streets with these other systems, then as they transition, that giant amount of pile of money that's going into mass incarceration, they can start taking it down. And not right away, just a little bit by little bit. Like Pell Grant, and then as they do it, they're just building it up over here. So Core Civic and Geo Group, the private prison groups, they're all into continuum of care now. Continuum of care and social work. They're like, the guards will all just be social workers next. And they won't actually have to have you in a physical prison. It'll be that. So these are the nonprofits. This is George Overholzer. He's with Third Sector. And the important thing you have to understand about George is he came out of Capital One. So Capital One credit cards were the first credit card that didn't really have a bank. And what they were really good at, even pre-cloud computing, was they crunched the numbers to know what their clients, like how much debt they could get their clients to take and manage. And to keep them happy with their debt. They didn't really want to crash. So they were very nuanced about knowing that and managing debt. So he then went into nonprofit finance fund, and that was the hostile takeover of the entire nonprofit sector in the United States, largely with Hewlett-Packard money, William and Flora. And then he's now Third Sector. And Third Sector is running all the proofs of concept of pay for success across the country. Okay, but if you don't know his backstory, you have to know the backstory to see where it comes from, because again, profiling debt control services. This is Tripp, this guy Tripp, he was with New Profit. They planned all of this out actually in a house called Mohawk House on the Hudson, and they all met, and they said, you know, we have this thing, we want to do it, and New Profit hosted America Forward, like a gathering of leaders, that's what they called it. The gathering of leaders went to Mohawk House, and David Gergen, who was a Harvard professor, he was a Duke professor, he's like a trustee at Duke, and presidential advisor, and his son's an impact investor. He said, you got to do it in the government. You got to bet it in the government. And the America Forward people said, thank God David came to the party and told us to do it in the government, because we were going to do it this other way, and it wouldn't have worked. So Duke is credentialing a lot of these things too. Duke was actually the home of the digital badges with Mozilla for a long time, and now I think it's moved to QE. But Duke was the incubator for the badges, and is doing a lot with global health. Michael Crow, again, we talked about Arizona State. He's with New America. New America is largely Eric Schmidt Google money. They're funding the Center for the Future of War. The future of war is autonomous weapons, drones, and weaponized narrative. Okay? So keeping our brains about us. Emmett Carson came out of the Twin Cities around the same time. He started the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. He was the first executive director. It was a combination of two very large foundations in Silicon Valley, which is the slush fund for all the tech venture capital. And so all of that lives, a lot of it's hugely in cryptocurrency. He was pushed out because someone under him was involved in like harassment things. And so he had to step down, and it's a new person, but he was like the father of all of that. And then Tom Ridge, I talked about Ridge Lane, so Homeland Security. And 1,000 Points of Light, this is a faith-based piece, right? Ugh. So, and also Tulsa. So in 1997, there was a summit for America's future and youth, right? In Philadelphia, where I live. I was living there then. And they all met, every living president, but Nancy Reagan came, bipartisan. And it was the idea of George Romney, Mitt's dad, but he was the former governor of Michigan, but he died before it could happen. So Harris Wofford, our Pennsylvania senator, who's a Democrat, set it up with Robert Goodwin of 1,000 Points of Light from Tulsa. So Robert Goodwin's family ran Oklahoma Eagle, and he went to Oral Roberts, and he got training in theology, and he ran Democrats for Bush. And then George Bush appointed him the first director of 1,000 Points of Light. So 1,000 Points of Light got together with the Wofford folks, and it turns out Wofford's son was over there in the U.S. Department of Education when all of the workforce alignment was going on. This was a few years earlier. Goals 2000, school to work, we're going to engineer everything. So that's interesting. And the people who were part of the alliance to set up this summit are all the people who are now doing human capital investing. So it's United Way, right? So United Way was in it way back then. Boys and Girls Club. So when, like, because people with this ecosystem, they're like, well, where do the little kids go? Because parents got to work. They go to the Boys and Girls Club. And then they can look at Khan Academy of videos. And you know, I hear Disney has a great Black Panther STEM curriculum, right? And it'll be served by Comcast. Because Comcast, you know, it's great and they get a lot of data. They get a lot of STEM data, right, on that. And so communities and schools, all the wraparound services. Corporation for National Community Service, which created the Social Innovation Fund that started Pay for Success, right? So Mentor Network, which is Tripp Jones, he was there before New Profit. Mentor Network was implicated in a lot of private foster care abuse and death, okay? So we have to understand as we're pushing isolated children out with devices, that it is a world of child predators. Like, I mean, I think we understand that through Epstein and everything else, is that there's some really terrible things that happen to children. And that, like, when you start, it turns out that the Catholic Church is very much involved, the Vatican Bank. They've had 3 impact investing conferences every 2 years, 2014, 16, and 18. The head of the Catholic Relief Services Impact Advisory Committee is I can't remember her name, but she's connected to the Boston Archdiocese, right? So again, these histories of problems, right? I mean, Spotlight, we know how that works. You send vulnerable children. Imagine the profiling, right? Here's your blockchain identity with all your social behavior and your ACEs scores, right? They will know exactly what to do with that information. Or someone will, not everyone. I mean, there's good people there everywhere. I'm not putting anyone in a box, but bad people, to think that bad people with power aren't in this machine would be misguided. So out of this summit came America's Promise. If you remember the securitization, it said America's Promise and Ready Nation. America's Promise came out of that, and then Ready Nation came out of that. And then that's the summit where they were talking about the blockchain in Ampli and the Boa Vista project. And Sarah Watson is part of Ready Nation, and Heckman and Duger. So here is all the infrastructure over here, and the Harlem Children's Zone is connected through Duger to Heckman of the human capital analytics. So these machines are running, and what I'm trying to say, like, I'm not a person of like an organized religion, but I do feel like faith and spirituality are a huge piece, is that how do we tell, because these outsourcing contracts will be running through faith communities. They will be running through Jewish family services, through Catholic family services, through mega churches, I mean, how do we, because I think there are probably some people in positions of power who might seek to use, like to say that they are doing good things and accrue more power to themselves by participating in the system. But I think most people, if we can frame it as, if someone comes to you in need of help, would you, and it comes on condition of them being on blockchain, would you assent to that? And I think we need to know that now, because it may be 5 years before that gets presented, and they'll normalize it, because what's happening is that Union High School has this blockchain transcript, right? Because it would probably be unseemly for it to come in unborn babies like in Tanzania, or with pre-K, people would be like, why do you need that? If you do it in high school, it's on a transcript, right? And everybody's used to a transcript, right? You say it's an enhanced transcript. You can add all your special activities. It will give you a better chance. And they'll slide it in free college, because they're down with the Dallas Promise. And they'll say, and it'll seem totally normal. It'll seem totally normal, that blockchain with the high school transcript. And then it'll come down, right? And then it'll come down. So how do we get?
Right now, question is, where isn't it? Where isn't it?
That's a good thing to discover, because as you were talking just now, I thought, one of the things, which I love to do anyway, is write letters to friends.
Where do you start? Yeah.
But there's a barcode that has to go on that envelope in order to go where it's going, and it's recording both zip codes. At the very least. So
In the churches,
you don't even have to worry about
But
them
see, I
opening
don't
your
think
mail
that people
anymore.
would agree to it if they knew.
Well, we know that apparently everyone doesn't know.
Right.
And it's convenient, so it's in everyone's home.
Yeah.
And in everyone's organization of whatever. If you're in a viable organization, there's apparently blockchain and
Coming.
in it
Not yet.
already.
Well, I mean, it's coming. These contracts aren't all in positions. Like, this is being built. They have proofs of concept.
Where is it not then? That's my question now.
I think some of the things like that we can remember is that thing always makes me so nervous.
Oh, sorry. I'm just because people.
I know. We like the churches don't like the people don't know. They're not bought into the model. So, when you give to an individual church. Now, I'm a part of the Catholic Church, and so we're tied into a bigger network. But we still have some local control. And if you get enough people right now who can say, yeah, I really don't want Catholic charities of Tulsa to be taking, like Wallace Foundation money to do these things, then we can say, I'm not going to give to Catholic charities anymore if I know that they're going to receive that money. Or, again, using my parish, St. Mary's, the mayor is coming in. I don't know the specifics.
Separation of church and state has gotten
yeah, you could do that because I could say,
interstate commerce.
I don't feel comfortable with Mayor Bynum coming in and using St. Mary's as a way to legitimize
Or
tracking
Bloomberg
people at
going down
61st
to-
and Peoria. Also, I think you stop giving to places like United Way through companies. So they always have these
what
drives.
you don't have is that list of, for instance, is John 316 affiliated? Or other local facilities affiliated through their churches? So we don't know where.
But see, where nobody's even talking about it. So I think what I've done. So with my friend who's connected with the NAACP is we passed this resolution against blockchain identity and linking it to a benefit, right, system. That it's a condition, and it's a one-pager, and it says even for people who don't know anything about blockchain, it's enough about behavioral conditioning and limiting access and compromising people's autonomy and built on these structures that have continued racism, and that we don't think that they should be linked. And so I'm hoping, what I would love to see is that, not that it has the carry of the weight of law, but as an educational document to say, hey, you don't know this, but this is actually many people who are powerful are laying this out. Could we make this resolution that we are opposing this thing and make it public?
Sure.
I mean, that's an easy first step to say, listen, I went to this crazy talk and this woman, but she's got a lot going on, and here's some links, and this thing is amply, and I'm hearing they know there's pre-K things. Could we look at this? Even if you say it hasn't happened yet, could we just get out in front of it and say, no, we're taking a position, no, that this isn't I believe truly that what is going to be needed is an abolition movement, a new abolition movement against digital identity. And I'm anticipating that it will be the strategies that people had to undertake in around doing the abolition, which of course it manifested in new ways, right? It didn't fully, when slavery was gone, it became neo-slavery, it became alternatives, but that we need a broad-based interracial, including people of faith, push against this system. And it's happened before, so I think we could do it again.
It's so subversive. People of faith, people that don't have a faith, they don't know.
Right. They don't know. They don't have the information.
Humans.
But clearly, some people know. There are powerful. Goldman Sachs knows.
We all have our televisions, smart TVs, Roku's, whatever these things we have in our homes.
Yeah.
We have these. We're participating in some kind of payment systems of government and or not.
Yeah,
businesses.
Digital. Yeah,
So
Venmo,
we're all
crowdsourcing. We're
participating.
crowdsourcing our healthcare.
Yeah. So
Whoa, we're getting lots of information from that one.
Yeah. So.
If you say, look, we've got a pilot program for digital driver's license. It's not law yet.
So So we need to
So I think we need to
start there.
Yeah. Hey,
We
look.
talk to each other
Is this a
and we
digital
say,
identity? Yeah.
We don't want this, and we don't want it tied with other databases. And if you look at like our healthcare right now, this push for expanded Medicaid, it's about the integrated data system, and
Oh,
you
there's
Yeah.
know
gonna be
who
a lot.
runs
I mean,
that.
Yeah.
that's already gone for vote already. I mean, people have already
I think that they just have the
approved it
petition.
to be.
It's
They've
gonna
already
go.
put it to be on ballot.
Yes.
Coming up, we don't know when. You know, if the government decides. The governor may want to put it on.
So I think, these are all, and because it's happening so quickly
It
here,
is.
and because, especially like people of faith, if you read the book of Revelation, and it talks about
It
like,
says it.
Yeah, I know. My friend
It
gives like the
says it.
chip.
we have one number.
It's
The market. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
this
The
is
mark of the
like,
beast.
Yeah.
this is sort of like it, and people, I think,
They're putting it in the animals already.
Yeah.
You
I mean,
mentioned,
yeah,
as
yeah.
goes the animals, there goes everybody else.
and like I think we use, we highlight different aspects of it with people's really, it's a common issue, but like, it's Democrats, it's Republicans, it's people of faith, it's not people of faith, it's anyone who uses health, who cares about kids and uses healthcare and education. So we say, we don't want that digital identity. We know that our kids do better if they're reading books and using paintbrushes. And so let's get them off the computer. And you know what? Like,
paint.
yeah. I think like.
But we have to stop this system because I think there are a lot of folks who are like, we need books, we need things, but they're not addressing this. They're not saying, I know this is the thing. They're just saying, it makes sense. You should go back to this, and they don't. So we have to expose this and sit and expose the alternative. So I'll just quick go through these last.
3 hours to expose it, so we need to.
Well, we're going to talk to Rico. We're going to have some amazing art project, right? Like we're going to come figure out a way. Like not to put him on the spot, but we need art, we need music, and I need solidarity. We need mutual aid. We need to be building up some subaltern spaces, and we need to support one another, and we need to understand this as not a partisan issue, and we need to build it on respect and respect of humanity, and it's going to take that level of pulling people out of boxes. And out of identity politics boxes, which is not to say that those pieces aren't important in terms of who individuals are, but we can't allow them to be used as levers of opposition. Like if we can be clear about this is based on a terrible past history, this is what's pretty amazing about Tulsa, and I've thought about it in terms of Philadelphia, is that our Constitution was fundamentally built to manage people in this way, to manage private property in ways that preference certain people over other people, right? That was, and like I keep thinking, maybe Philadelphia's going to get a do-over. Maybe we're going to get to make it right. Well, Tulsa also has a similar history, right? Like maybe this moment of reconciliation, like maybe in this crucible is the thing to go forward on, is to take this, and it just, like I said, I'm not a person of faith, but it feels like.
That way, I don't see it in that way.
Okay, all right.
The way I think it's just saying, it's a recognition, and then it's just to placate and just continue to.
I think we need something new. I think the thing that has to come out of this isn't just dialing back and spackling up the thing we had. That, if they're talking about things the way they're talking about them, that the future will be something new, and those of us who are in positions of trying to bring guidance to have a better outcome need to align and try to direct this upheaval into a better outcome.
Two things just came to mind, that there has to be some kind of oversight that is whatever, governmental or a unified coalition of churches and people. It's tricky because one of the ways that I think we'll get at it is because separation of church and state. So if you're putting all of these things in.
But I think churches don't want to have the strings of the government on them either.
Well,
it depends. And I will say, so this is the one thing I forgot to mention. So locally, I organize with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, and it's with Sherry Hunkela and a number of folks who've been organizing around welfare rights for years. They're independent. They take no private money. At the same time, the Poor People's Campaign, which is led by Reverend Barber, who is a very amazing spokesperson and very eloquent, but he is backed by, that program is based in the Cairo Center, and that program, the Cairo Center, is funded by the Ford Foundation.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Ford Foundation has $1 billion in impact investments, and there are very, very many well-intentioned people who are organizing around poverty, who, and I don't know where Reverend Barber is, if he is aware of this or not, that are organizing on this campaign who may not understand stakeholder capitalism and what's involved, right? So like when we're talking about organizing across faith, because that's in interfaith groups, is how do we both, I'm not to slap those hands and tell those people they're stupid or, tell them they're bad people. It's just to say, wake up, it's not, there's something else going on here. How do we like redirect? And that's hard because people don't like to feel like they're wrong or that they've been tricked, right? Like nobody, like that's a terrible feeling. So navigating that is going to be tricky.
So avoiding that feeling is tantamount for most human beings. They do want to, and that is something that they're banking on.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is to frame all of this in a way that we are very specific about. We're not opposed to the technology. We're not opposed to technology. We're not opposed to that. What we're opposed to is the way that it has been,
I would say read Surveillance Valley and then see.
No,
it's complex. I mean, it is very complex.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. But in the simplest terms,
Okay, I'm just going to finish up. I'm going to do speed through. Okay, so we know that it's feeding an economic system, right? The new economics. We're building augmented reality. We're building geofencing. We're building the smart cities. In Sidewalk Labs, they actually are creating carve-out spaces of corporatization that they're planning on having their own police forces, and if you do something wrong, they can put you on pathways. So that's Sidewalk Labs, okay? So that's already up and coming, public-private partnerships within urban spaces, okay? So we talked about the geofencing and the nudge. They want the people to build this. They want everyone to go along. So this is Ready Nation doing human capital. This Strong Nation is very scary, okay? It's Council for a Strong America. Ready Nation is one of its 5 programs. It's bipartisan in 50 states, 9,000 members. They want everyone aligned with the proper mindset around policing, the military, the Chamber of Commerce, athletics, and specifically evangelical Christianity, okay? So this is the deep state. This is saying we're building the augmented reality world, and and we got to make sure everybody. That's why the mental health. Like if you're problematic, we're not going to put you in any position of coding the digital prison, right? Because we got to know that we can count on folks.
And you're identified at birth whether you're going to be
right. Exactly where you're going to be a problem. So this is like when I talk about the oak paneled room. This is the oak paneled room in the background. This is Heckman, Duger, and Durloff. This is his human capital group. They're meeting with all the folks. One of the folks is this guy who is the CEO of Otis. We went when Daryl was talking about the map testing yesterday, these benchmark testing. Otis is now the authorized data partner. They're actually talking about tracking the top 5, the big 5 ocean trades. And he says in this clip, he's like, do you think I'm used to be a principal of a school in suburban Chicago? Think I'm going to tell parents I'm tracking their kids' neuroticism? Heck no, I don't want to pack the board meeting. So I'm not going to tell them we're tracking that. And that's part of the CEL assessment. And the CASEL, which is based out of, also out of Chicago, the social emotional learning, is Buffett money. It's Novo Foundation, it's Peter Buffett, not Warren, but they just share money. So that's that big pot of money that's coming to get the social. Nudging, putting people on pathways. Goldman Sachs is getting this giant payout on the 3rd grade test scores in Chicago. Those kids are all on the tech. There was it came out of 2008. Now we're going to put these people in charge of kids. Like, no, we shouldn't be doing that. Behavioral economics. This is all tying in digital things to behavioral economics. Ideas 42 came out of Harvard. This is Penn. The behavior change for good. Okay, what are the digital nudges and who is nudging? This is the Moneyball government. This is y'all, the all of the behavioral insights unit. That's the nudges. What works cities. This is Tulsa right now. So this is us. We are a couple years ahead of you, 2017. We have our cool GovLab. So these are just some apps. This is a court appearance app, data mining people for showing up in court. This is a data mining thing, counting words. It's surveillance in people's homes. They put it in the kids' onesie and listen, you talk to the kids. Do you talk enough? This came out of University of Chicago. That's like the 30 million word gap. So they're going to listen to you and see if you talk enough to your kids. Okay, and look, so this is what this is about. Now in Philly, in the literacy, they said, we want to put book bins in all of the laundromats and barbershops. Well, that's interesting. They want to put them in all the Okay, well, I like books. Okay, well, what's that about? Well, where, if you were going to have civic culture in communities, would people gather to talk? laundromats, and barbershops. Well, in 3 years, there'll be Echo. Oh, those books, they got so old and no one was really looking at the books, but they love an online story. Let's just put Echo in those places, and then we can listen. This is Gold Mama. This is the South Carolina Nurse Family Partnership. This is in other places. They're texting content to mothers on Medicaid, pregnant women. And right now, it's voluntary. They set up social media. If you don't, you're supposed to interact and be in chat rooms with people. But like, what happens when that becomes a score? Oh, you didn't score high enough to take your baby home, right? You didn't perform well enough on goal. These people think poverty is solved with a nudge, and that's the thing. I talked about economic mobility, moving people around. So y'all are all part of this Tulsa economic mobility. That's the Opportunity Atlas. They're going to start engineering kids out of neighborhoods. And when they do, they'll take the money out. Oh, look, Bing, we fixed you. We moved you away from all the people you knew. And now you have no support network. And who's deciding on the nudges? Because Angela Duckworth is all part of this, and she's still citing Galton in her lectures, not as a bad thing, father of eugenics. And she's funded by the Templeton Foundation, also eugenics. And they're talking about integrating psychology into aspects of agent decision making. So who's deciding? Tech. If you're engineering your workforce to the Chamber of Commerce, do you think the Chamber of Commerce is going to engineer a workforce so they pay the most? Like a decent wage? No, they're going to flood the market so that they can pay the least amount possible and get the pick of the litter. So this idea of engineering markets for the chamber doesn't make any sense, especially when the economy isn't working for most people. So this is IBM. P-Tech is a huge part of this. And in Texas, this guy Tom Luce is saying, we think corporations should have a campus with their own school and track kids. It will be in their school under their control from pre-K to 20 and train them up in the corporate culture, which is also crazy because with gig economies, I don't know who they think is going to stay there for 20 years. But this is our regional workforce plan for southeastern Pennsylvania. They just say that we're going to have a gig economy. This is our state plan, and I keep going to our poverty committee. Did you read the plan? They said we're going to have a gig economy. How do you have a stable family on a gig economy?
What's gig?
It's like driving Uber or doing a little job, little mini contracts. I'm freelance. Only I never know when my next contract's coming up, right? It's the growth jobs for Pennsylvania, 2015, these are the high growth sectors. Okay, we got a $57 an hour, that's a manager. 33, that's an accountant. Everybody else, 12, 16, 11, 9, 8, 10, 10. Tell me how you live with a family in Philadelphia on that wage. You can't. You can't. And this was set up by Gates. Gates and Jobs for the Future and Lumina, $121 million. They've been pouring money into this for 10 years. And now that they've got digital identity, it's ready to come online. They put you on a pathway. Ka-ching, 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 ka-ching. Everything gets a payment. The FAFSA completion gets a payment. Graduation rates gets a payment. Everybody gets a payment. Get a badge, get a payment. It's a pathway to nowhere. Basically, it's a pathway to the gig economy. They've already said that that's their plan. So this is the end. You said, where is it not? Really nowhere, right? I mean, maybe North Korea. Like maybe they got, so we have to fight where we are. We have to link up together, but this is in Tulsa. So when I said you've got your blockchain-based credentials, it's here. It's not in everywhere, it's in this one school. It's in Dallas, okay? These are two different blockchain programs. This is Learning Machine of MIT, and this is Greenlight Credentials, which is the guy is from India, actually. Impact Tulsa was visiting Dallas for Dallas Promise last week, so there's a direct connection. And I kind of want to write a blog post about like the Tale of Two Blockchains or something and talk about this linkage because it's very petroleum-based, and there's some scary deep state stuff going on in Dallas that I think has its tentacles up here in Tulsa. We've got Vander Ark in this. So this is what all of this is. How do we get in touch with these families in this school and explain to them what's really happening, right? That like in 10 years, that there's not going to be that school. This school will be turned into, I don't know, housing for unhoused people in a community service provider center, and it won't be a school, and then unpack that. What does that mean for pre-K? You have a proof. You have something to hang it on. Oh, sorry. This is the proof. SNHU started it. That was the first one with Learning Machine. It's in the EU, Blockchain in Education. It's in Malta, same thing, learning machine. They're talking about linking blockchain education payments to education systems. That's the EU. The Heritage Foundation, which is conservative, is framing this as choice, saying that you should use ESAs, which are vouchers, similar, but they won't be, because they'll be for unbundled. I think a voucher, people think, oh, I'm going to take my thing to the Catholic school. I'm going to take my thing to the private school. Right. No, it's going to be, I have my digital wallet and I go to the library and ding a little payment for doing a cooking class. Or I'm going to go to the climbing wall and ding and get a payment.
Choice.
No, well, it will be multiple choices, but like, who thinks they're going to give you enough to actually get an adequate education? So even the conservatives, and they don't know, the unschooled families, they think, fine, I'm walking away from your system. But when you walk away, essentially what this means is that everybody who takes the money will get pulled into the data and pulled into the standards, right? Because if you do, that's the cost of doing business. So you will essentially have to build a parallel system that doesn't take the money to get the same outcome. You'll have to build your own library. You'll have to build your own community theater. You'll have to build your own climbing wall. You'll have to build your own ice skating rink. Like, that doesn't take the voucher unless we stop it now. So this is SNAP. This is not yet actionable.
Not taking the voucher isn't any better in the public system either. So
right.
It's like
that's why we all have to fight. I mean, I think on the plus side is we can all fight, because ultimately it's coming after everyone, right? It's coming after everyone. These boxes where it's saying public schools versus charter schools versus unschooled, in this world it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter.
That's what I'm hearing.
So, in a way, and that's hard for people to get their head around. I mean, it was hard for me to get my head around until, like, I've spent several years in this. I'm like, we're all in this together. And there are people in the homeschool communities, I think, who are deceiving people about this, saying that homeschooling is the answer and not telling the truth about these blockchain systems, right? And so the homeschooling communities, the conservative homeschool, are fragmenting because some people can see it and some people can't. But this is almost my last one. This is SNAP from the state of Illinois has a blockchain task force working group, and they did a final report, and in it they started conceptualizing how this would work. So this isn't actually actionable yet, but this is their headspace. They do have a pilot blockchain birth certificate program. Their blockchain birth certificate program was done in partnership with Evernym, and Evernym is based out of Salt Lake City. Okay? So I think when we're thinking there's a lot of stuff going on in Salt Lake City, there's also a lot of money in LDS Church, okay? And Sorensen, who's connected, and Romney, like these systems. Again, not any one faith, but there's a lot of money locked up in faith-based communities of various sorts. And this is going to start to allow them to mobilize their money in ways that let them appear to be doing good with a lot of social control. So this is SNAP. You're a person, you have your welfare application, you get your digital wallet, and for your food, if you buy the wrong thing, it just, the money goes out of your account, and if you buy what they want you to buy, you get a little bit of money back. And it's framed as an incentive until the amount that goes in the wallet only lasts you to the end of the month if you always make the right choice, right? Like, it'll be an incentive until it isn't actually. And so if you imagine this very simple mechanism, it's choice architecture. What choice are you going to make? What choice do we want me to make? What choice are you actually going to make? And then there's a price difference there, a surge pricing. So what does that look like with an education voucher, right? What does that look like with curriculum? This is the curriculum we'd like you to take. This is the evidence-based curriculum. This is evidence-based. This is the evidence-based telemedicine. This is the evidence-based teletherapy. This works. You know, if you do that, we'll give you a little bit back. If you don't, if you do homeopathy, if you do Black Panther curriculum, if you do these other things that are not like what we want you to do, it's going to cost you, right? And you're not going to be able to actually make it work for you if you make your own choice. So yeah. And then this is a thing I did about like what this looks like. So you've got a digital identity. You're collecting your badges. The payments are going through these smart contracts on blockchain, and these are all the things you're interacting with, like a work-based learning. That's what Big Picture is about. You go out and you work, right? But they have an app. Salesforce worked with Big Picture and Ted Dintersmith on this app that tracks social competencies, right? Like, why would you need an app to have an apprenticeship program? Like, if you were going to have like a program a high school kid went to 3 days a week, wouldn't you like have a counselor tell you what were the good ones. Why would you? It's not like Yelp. It's like, what's a good Mexican restaurant around here? It's not the same thing. It's an app to track competencies. Your online learning, your gamified stuff, like your Wii gym. Oh, you can just do Wii for gym. Like they're doing that some places. You know, you can just jog, but with a Fitbit, and the data comes back. And teletherapy and supportive housing. And this is where I'm talking about the push for social workers in schools. While I understand the need, and I'm not, they are ultimately agents of the state. They are representatives of these systems, and then though they may be very wonderful people, they are first report. You know, they are mandated reporters. And so when someone comes in and your kid says, "I'm housing insecure," and this machine is built off of managing unhoused people or managing disruptive behavior, and then an option is presented to a family, and a lot of these records are being fed into AI analytics. The social work records are all being fed into AI and making predictions about people. At what point will families be able to say, "No, thank you. I prefer my child not to be put on the prescription video game for their outbursts. Maybe the problem is that the school environment doesn't have any books or art, and you're making them sit there for 6 hours." Like, it's not my child that's the problem, it's the structure that's the problem. And they say, "But your child is a problem, we should put them on Achille. It's the evidence-based ADHD treatment program." And so at that point, when the parent's like, "No, thank you," and they say, "Well, we might have someone visit your house. Maybe you're not a fit parent." And I think that's what I'm trying to convey, is that the systems of power are such that when vulnerable populations, when black and brown populations that have been used as profit centers for so long, when this comes online, why would we think it's going to be any different this time around? I just don't think so. So this is the end. You guys win. It's like we're being at the end. This is my blockchain my blockchain resolution. So, ta-da! Like we have a model. It's this, you know. And I think this is the stopping point, is to say, and this will go. I'll send this with you. But like, we can say we don't want people on blockchain.